And this was the scene atop Buckingham Palace in London today, the Royal Standard flying at half-mast to mark the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. The period of official mourning is underway. When the Queen Mother died today, her exit was typical of her style. There were no final crises. She passed away much as she had lived, in dignity, in majesty. While the news was a shock, the world was poised and ready. She was 101 after all, and she had not been able to shake off a recent illness. During this next 90 minutes, we will tell you about the details of her death, the reaction to it from Canada and all over the world. We'll hear from royal biographers in London about the Queen Mother's enormous contribution to the times in which she lived. In so many ways, the 20th century, to which we have all bid adieu, was the Queen Mother's century. We begin now with this report on her death from James Cowling of CTV in London. James?
It's late evening here in London now, and news of the Queen Mother's death has spread quickly throughout the country. The Sunday papers, which will be out shortly, will no doubt be full of tributes to the woman known to many as the nation's favorite grandmother.
To inaugurate.
The Queen Mother died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 101. Her daughter, Queen Elizabeth, is said to have been at her mother's bedside in Windsor when she died at 3:15 local time this afternoon. The BBC interrupted its programming to announce the death to the nation.
This is BBC Television News. Buckingham Palace has just announced the death of the Queen Mother.
A palace official said the Queen Mother had become increasingly ill in recent weeks following a bad cough and chest infection over Christmas. And some will say she never recovered from the death of her youngest daughter, Princess Margaret, who died at the age of 71 less than 2 months ago. Prince Charles, who's on a skiing holiday in Switzerland with Princes William and Harry, released a statement saying they are devastated by the news. Hundreds of mourners have already gathered at Buckingham Palace to pay tribute and read the death announcement posted on the gate. In February, the Queen Mum attended her daughter, Princess Margaret's funeral, but did not appear in public. Before that, she had rarely been seen in public after her last birthday. Prime Minister Tony Blair led the tributes with an official statement saying the Queen Mother had been a symbol of Britain's decency and courage.
She was a dominant, unifying figure in our country's history for the best part of a century. Never more so than in the Blitz, when she insisted on staying in London. And she represented not just her own spirit, but the spirit of the British people in those dark times.
The Queen Mother's coffin is expected to be moved to the Royal Chapel of All Saints in Windsor on Sunday morning. Members of the royal family are expected to forego their regular Easter services for a private memorial service. Lloyd?
James, give us the rundown of the next few days in terms of planning for the Queen Mother's mourning and funeral.
Well, there are 9 official days of mourning, and during that time there will be a public vigil, which will be at Westminster Hall in London.
Now, I know that people were not all that surprised. There was the shock, the instant shock of her death, of course. But had you been hearing much there about her illness over the last few days?
There was a newspaper report recently that said that her eyesight was going bad, and that was the only sort of speculation, that her health had deteriorated since Christmas time, when she missed the services over Christmas with the rest of the royal family. But other than that, there had been no indication that she was suffering at all.
Thank you, James. James Cowling for CTV reporting from London. Well, the Queen Mother made no secret of her love for this country. She made 11 trips to Canada from 1939 to her last in 1989. On every single occasion, she was greeted warmly and with enthusiasm, and she returned the sentiment. Then last year, in an unprecedented move, Governor General Adrian Clarkson traveled to London to present the Queen Mother with this country's highest honor, the Companion of the Order of Canada. A little earlier, the Governor-General paid tribute to this country's and the world's favorite grandmother.
Since her first trip to Canada in 1939, Canadians have all sensed that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was one of us. Her royal title could not eclipse her enormous warmth, joie de vivre, and good humor. We responded with heartfelt affection and respect. I felt this deeply in the autumn of 2000, when I was honored to recognize the Queen Mother as a Companion of the Order of Canada. In Canada, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was a vital presence in many of our institutions and organizations. She was Colonel-in-Chief of the Black Watch Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, the Toronto Scottish Regiment, and the Canadian Forces Medical Services. The Queen Mother was the Grand President of the Victorian Order of Nurses in Canada and an honorary member of the Law Society of Upper Canada. She was the patron of many national organizations, including the Canadian Red Cross Society. Today, we mourn the passing of the Queen Mother, and we celebrate her long and remarkable life. The century of her lifespan was shaken with radical and sometimes violent change, but through every upheaval, she exemplified courageous devotion to duty. Refusing to abandon her compatriots by evacuating to North America during the Blitz of World War II, she inspired not only Great Britain, but also its allies. The death of the Queen Mother marks the end of an era. We offer at this time our deepest sympathy to Her Majesty the Queen and to the royal family. We join in sorrow our friends throughout the Commonwealth who, like us, will miss the Queen Mother and all that her extraordinary character added to this century and the last.
Her Excellency, the Governor-General, speaking to Canadians on the announcement of the Queen Mother's death. With me is John Amers of the Monarchist League of Canada. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Amers.
Good evening, Lord.
Now, what was your reaction when you first heard this news today?
I was surprised. I think, as you said, 101 is a great age, and the fact of death can't be a shock, but there was no indication it was so imminent, and I felt enormous sorrow for the Queen that in this, her Jubilee year, she's lost within a space of 6 months, both her sister Margaret and now her beloved Queen Mother.
The Queen Mother had so many threads running into the fabric of Canada. It's incredible when you think about it. 11 trips here, Colonel-in-Chief of regiments. How do you think, what do you think overall her contribution was in terms of this country's understanding of the monarchy?
I think the Governor-General, as she often does, put it exactly right, that her royal title never eclipsed her joie de vivre, her love of the country. I think her contribution, Lloyd, was to be the stable center of a shifting cast of characters and of ups and downs in recent years that the monarchy has encountered. The Queen Mother was always there, had no agenda of her own, except to give pleasure to others and to support others in their work and to lend her support to good causes, her regiments, the Governor-General mentioned, and so on. So I think it's one of giving and of service to others. That's her proudest memory and boast, I think, for today.
And the love for her from Canadians never seemed to diminish, did it? It was a very special relationship Canadians had with the Queen Mother.
They did. The Toronto Scottish Regiment was enormously proud last year when the Queen agreed to add the title Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's Own, to their regimental title. I think every one of us felt that the Queen Mother was a part of us, and I remember her last visit to Canada in 1989 when the streets of London, Ontario were mobbed with parents and grandparents holding up their children and grandchildren and pointing to the Queen Mother, living history, a seam of pure gold that went right through that century. And they were very conscious, I think, that children were seeing part of our history, someone who continued to work and to defy stereotypes about aging and retirement well up past her centenary.
In fact, there are many people, probably like myself tonight, who remember being on the shoulders of their parents in 1939, as I was, in Stratford, Ontario, when the royal train went through carrying King George and Queen Elizabeth. So in that sense, she does cover all of the generations, doesn't she?
She does, and she gave the king, called unexpectedly to the throne as he was at the time of the abdication of Edward VIII, this steel. I mean, he was a somewhat diffident man with a stammer, quite a temper, never had been expected to call to that sort of public duty. She and Canada gave him the steel, and after that 1939 visit, she remarked, "Canada made us." It gave the king the confidence that he could walk with crowds, that he could inspire people, he could be a leader. That would prove so important, of course, during the 6 years of war that were to follow.
Mr. Amers, thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Lord.
John Amers of the Monarchist League of Canada. Ordinary Canadians, of course, had their say on all of this today. John Venevali-Rowell of CTV was out on the streets talking to Canadians and also listening as officials made their statements about the Queen Mother's passing. Here he is.
As a country begins to honor an extraordinary life, a time to pause and reflect. On the streets of the nation, words of sorrow and sadness.
I just think she was a wonderful, wonderful woman, and everybody loved her. And we all have happy thoughts and happy memories about her. I think she was, you know, full of integrity.
She was a very strong character for the Britons when World War II was around, so I guess she showed strength for the country.
From the Prime Minister on tour in Africa, this statement.
We were blessed by her full life, made richer by her presence and example, and feel a very profound sense of loss that her extraordinary spirit is gone.
At this Scottish regiment in Toronto, the Queen Mum was honorary colonel and chief. She made a royal visit in 1939.
She always had a soft spot in her heart for Canadians and for her regiment.
And in Legions, there was simply surprise and sadness at the news.
I think she was a great lady. No kidding. Yeah. She always had that big wave.
From this monarchist, a reflection on a remarkable royal.
The Queen Mother sort of epitomized the graciousness, the dignity, and she had all the class that a member of the royal family should have, even though she was not born into the royal family.
And as the country begins a time of honoring the Queen Mum's time, she will be remembered for her hats, her smile, and her grace. John Venavalli Rao, CTV News, Halifax.
Ah, yes, the hats, the smile, the grace, the dignity. In many ways, what we'll be remembering over the next 9 days is the woman's style and the person herself, of course, but also the fact that she was there all through the difficult times for Britain and for Canada from 1940 onward, especially from that trip in 1939 when, as John Abers said, she gave us the steel. Canada gave us the steel to move forward. Craig Oliver, CTV Ottawa Bureau Chief, is outside Government House in Ottawa. The Governor-General made her statement on the passing of the Queen Mother a little while ago. Craig, this is a day of memories of this incredible woman who lived through our lives and seemed to be a constant presence, both of dignity and of steeliness.
Well, she particularly had a connection with Canada, Lloyd. As you were saying earlier, she made 11 visits here. On one of her last visits, she said, "Canada has taken my heart. That will never change." And of course, many Canadian veterans were given decorations by her during the war. Her great time was wartime. It's hard to believe that she made such an immense impact on the Commonwealth, on the world. And when you think about it, I think she was only queen for about 16 years. You were talking earlier about how approachable she was. And I think that's because she was, you know, born a commoner. And she had a common touch with people. She was easy to talk to, everyone who ever met her said. So I think that a lot of people who knew her, knew of her, will miss her here. There hasn't been much in the way of public response here in Ottawa because on this quiet Easter weekend, I think many people hadn't yet heard the news. And the Prime Minister's office, even though she'd been ill for a couple of weeks now, was really caught by surprise. The Prime Minister was in North Africa on a working vacation. I guess he can't be criticized for that because the Queen's son himself, Charles, was skiing in Switzerland and wasn't there at her bedside when she died.
Yeah, so the word we have on that, Craig, is that the Queen Mother was pronounced stable when Charles, in fact, left for the ski holiday in close to Switzerland, and her condition deteriorated very quickly overnight, and Queen Elizabeth herself was there for her passing at 3:15 Saturday, London time.
Lloyd, the government has not announced yet who will attend the funeral. Presumably the Governor-General will, but there's usually a spokesman from the Government of Canada also. Perhaps it'll be Sheila Copps because the Heritage Minister takes over at times like this. So we're waiting probably in the next day or so for that. The Governor-General plans to open a book of condolence here at Rideau Hall probably tomorrow. But again, that hasn't been officially announced yet either.
All right, Craig, thank you very much.
Good night, Lloyd.
CTV Ottawa Bureau Chief Craig Oliver speaking to us from outside Government House in Ottawa. With me now from London, two royal biographers who have followed the Queen Mother's life and times as closely as anyone. First of all, Graham Turner. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Turner. And Christopher Warwick. I'm sure these gentlemen's faces would be familiar to those of you who've seen them on Canada AM and other programs in which we've covered royal matters. First of all, let's just talk a little bit. We're going to be seeing a documentary on her life very shortly, so we'll get all of the information about her Scottish background and so on. But let's talk a little bit about the last few years for the Queen Mother. What have they been like? You first, Mr. Turner.
Well, I mean, obviously the last year or so, her condition has really been deteriorating a little by little as the years gone by. But until then, I mean, she went on with her life in an amazing way. I mean, she was the party girl to end all party girls. She had more parties in a year than you and I have had hot dinners. I mean, really extraordinary. And, you know, even in the last year, well, you know, when she was 98, she went out to see Oklahoma in London, came back to Clarence House, had dinner at 11:45, would you believe, went to bed at 1:30. I mean, it's only been in the last year or so that she's been slowing down, but she was a person who enjoyed life to the full. And it's sad that in the last year she did have to slow down a little.
Yes, just as you're speaking to us, Mr. Choudhury and Mr. Warwick, we are rolling in some video of pictures of the Queen Mother here attending some of those last events over the last couple of years. And she was always looking as though she was enjoying herself. That seemed to be one of the keys for this woman's long life, wasn't it, Mr. Warwick? That everything she did, she seemed to enjoy.
She did. And following on from what Graham was just saying, I had the great privilege of attending the birthday party that the Queen gave for her mother, for Princess Margaret, for the Princess Royal and the Duke of York in June of 2000. And when I tell you that that day, of course, this great party was given in the middle of Ascot Week, and the reception that we were all invited to didn't begin until 10 o'clock that evening. So she'd been at the races all day long. There'd been a family dinner party from about 7:30 onwards. I talked to her as she came through from the grand reception room to the Waterloo Chamber at Windsor Castle, which must have been easily 12:15 a.m. the next morning. And she was going strong, and a niece of hers said, "Oh, Aunt Elizabeth, do you remember Christopher Warwick?" And she said, "Oh, Mr. Warwick, how lovely to see you. I hope you're having a lovely time." This was a lady who was celebrating 100 years then. And I think this, as Graham was saying, is a mark of a really very remarkable woman. But can I just say that I know for a fact that we were not talking about Queen Elizabeth being ill at the moment. I was talking to a niece of hers earlier today, and the Queen Mother was sitting up in her bed at Royal Lodge, chatting away, and the Queen came along, and the Queen Mother fell asleep and remained asleep. So we're not really talking about somebody who died of an illness. We're talking about somebody who, as one would have expected, faded away.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Warwick. We'd just like to expand a little bit on that, because I don't think we've heard that before today. That she was indeed up this morning and somewhat lively, and just literally went to sleep. Is that it?
Well, indeed, she was. Queen Elizabeth was her usual conversant self. I think that we're putting too much emphasis on this dreadful cold that she had, this flu-like cold that kept her at Sandringham. There was, of course, just last month, the huge question of whether or not she was going to be able to attend the funeral of Princess Margaret. But she was getting over all of this, and I'm not convinced that the two were linked. As I say, I was talking to one of her nieces just earlier today, and she said that Queen Elizabeth was chatting away this morning, but you know, the brain was fine, but she was fading away, and she just went to sleep, and bless her heart, she didn't wake up.
Well, as we look at some of these pictures, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to keep you there, if you don't mind, and we're going to look at a bit of a documentary now, which shows us some of the Queen's early life, looking back at the life of the Queen Mum, as we call her, through a documentary entitled, "I'm Sure You Wouldn't Mind Me Telling You This." In the first part, we hear about her early years, when her father opened the doors to the castle in Scotland to soldiers wounded in World War I, and later to her marriage to Prince George, the future king.
The ninth of 10 children, The Honourable Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon was born at the turn of the century, a year before the death of Queen Victoria. It was the beginning of the most dramatic and progressive age the world had ever seen.
At the age of 14, the Great War broke out. She lost a brother when she was 15. She saw extraordinary changes from her childhood at Glamis, where motor cars must have been an uncommon sight, through to the 60s and people landing on the moon. Since 1900, there's probably never been a period of greater change, and yet she was able to adapt to that, to impose her own standards on her way of life. And I think, in summary, I would say that duty was her calling.
She was descended from a long line of Scottish nobility, and the family home was Glamis Castle.
I think I'm privileged that once she told me her very first memory in her life was sitting on her grandfather's knee in what's now the private side of the castle, looking out at the fairy lights in the trees, which were part of the celebrations for her grandparents' golden wedding in 1903. So she was obviously 3 years old, and those were her first memories. And it's interesting that they are of Glamis. They came to live here permanently from 1914 to 1918. I don't know what happened to the other houses, but they were certainly based totally here, because Glamis was a convalescent home for wounded soldiers. And there were soldiers, obviously, from all over Britain, but also from Australia and Canada. And there was this child of 14 at the beginning of the war who was exposed to all these influences that she obviously wouldn't have ever had if it hadn't been for the war. And she continued with her education. She had a governess here and a schoolroom, but a great deal of her time was spent looking after the wounded soldiers. She ran errands for them. She played the piano to them. She played cards with them. They obviously adored her.
It was a grooming that was to prove invaluable in years to come, the ability to make those she met feel very special, including the young Prince Albert, Duke of York. But at the tender age of 20, she was reluctant to take on the rigors of public life. It took the young Duke 2.5 years to persuade her to become his Duchess. They were married in Westminster Abbey in April 1923. It was the beginning of a partnership that, unbeknown to them, was to guide the country through some very dramatic times. The people nicknamed her the Smiling Duchess, as she forgot the royal convention set by Queen Victoria to keep a straight face in public. Her smile was to become the most recognizable of her many graces. The Yorks were very popular and revived the fortunes of a stiff and formal royal family. She married a shy man and helped him overcome not only his shyness, but also an agonizing stammer. Some even suggested that she wore the trousers.
It was he who was the man of action. And I think that worked so well because they were complementary to each other. He was apt to look into things and perhaps to see different choices. She did the same thing, and sometimes they almost stopped her making up her mind, but he could do that. And so it was two strong people united.
The family exuded solidarity. Even the young daughters were encouraged to play their part in the new, approachable royal family. For the foreseeable future, family life was secure. The Duchess combined a high public profile with her duties as a loving mother. Meanwhile, at court, the king feared for the reputation of his eldest son, the Prince of Wales. The Silver Jubilee was to be George V's last official engagement. He was ill and concerned for the succession. He died just 6 months later. The new king, Edward VIII, had publicly declared his love for American divorcee Wallis Simpson and was determined to marry her, throwing the Constitution into turmoil. His only choice was to abdicate.
A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor.
This placed an intolerable burden on the Duke and Duchess of York. The tranquility of their family life was about to be shattered. They were crowned in Westminster Abbey in May 1937. He took the name George VI. She was the first British-born Queen Consort to be crowned since Tudor times. Afterwards, she was to call the coronation an intolerable honor.
Initially, I'm sure she felt frustrated by what was obviously going to be a termination of a happy family, cozy life, not under the shadow of the throne. And indeed, her reaction to her relations with the Duke of Windsor and the Duchess of Windsor were less than cordial, as is well known. But of course, having faced the challenge, she took it up with great aplomb and carried it through magnificently.
She never expected to be the Queen, something she remarked upon to me several times. So her life changed dramatically, not only by becoming Queen, but also immediately afterwards the war started.
The King and Queen had reigned for just 28 months and were to face the greatest challenge of their lives together.
When the war broke out, she said, "I'm not going to go down like the others," meaning the other royal families and on the continent. And in order not to go down, she was going to defend herself. She practiced revolver firing in the garden at Buckingham Palace in case a parachute, a German parachutist, descended. The Nazis, she was not going to be caught unawares. And when Lord Halifax, who was given permission to walk through the palace on the way to his office, through the palace garden, he heard these shots very close. He wondered what they were. When he heard it was the Queen at her target practice, he thought perhaps it was better to go a different way around.
Even in the Blitz, when Buckingham Palace was bombed, the Queen refused to leave London, saying she would not leave without the King, and the King would not leave.
Their Majesties had a very lucky escape. They were standing by a window, looking on to the inner courtyard, and they actually saw the bombs coming down, and the bomb or bombs hit the chapel. But they were unhurt, mercifully. But I was there one evening during the V1s and V2s, and very kindly, the King and Queen had invited the lady-in-waiting and myself to dine with them. And as coffee came towards the end, there was the most almighty explosion. And the King said, go and find out what that was. And it was the V1 which hit a pub, I think, next to Selfridge's, and killed a lot of London citizens. But under fire, both of their Majesties were they had a lot of sang-froid.
She was there to share as far as a queen could share with ordinary people. And the famous case when Buckingham Palace was bombed, and she said, "I'm glad we've been bombed. I can now look the East End in the face," because the East End of London was being bombed continually. She would come and visit them. She would do everything she could to help them. But she was going back to a palace with sentries all round, and barbed wire. So it made her feel embarrassed to visit these tiny houses smashed to bits and feel she'd not had a share in it, but she had.
She focused people's minds, people's emotions on the country, on what it was to be British, what it was to be a subject of hers and her husband's. I mean, going round bombed London in the Blitz,
talking to the people who'd just been bombed out or perhaps lost their wives or husbands or children or whatever that. And just radiating sympathy.
When peace finally came, it was clear that the king's health had already taken a heavy toll. They were both mentally and physically exhausted, but their public example encouraged the British people to get their lives back to normal. For the King and Queen, there was good news too. Their eldest daughter, Princess Elizabeth, had fallen in love with Prince Philip of Greece. But before they could be married, the family embarked on what was to be their last official engagement together, a grueling state visit to South Africa in February 1947, to bring together a divided Commonwealth protectorate at the dawn of apartheid.
There's one story that I can't vouch for, in which one of the Afrikaners said, I'm sorry, but I cannot bring myself to like the English. To which the Queen Mother is alleged to have said, well, I do understand, but of course I'm Scotch.
Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip were married in November 1947. But at that time, few people knew quite how ill the king was. Even the joy of the birth of their first grandchild, Charles, the next year, was dulled by the threat of the king's imminent surgery. When it was made public, the news shocked the people, and although the king made a partial recovery, in reality, his health was in decline. In early 1952, the king bade farewell to his daughter and son-in-law on their planned Commonwealth tour. It was the last time that the future queen was to see her father. The heavy burden of public duty had taken its final toll.
She did, in fact, believe that it was through his duties as king, and the war, of course, coming on top of his ascending the throne after the abdication, that his health finally broke down.
I always remember the page who found the king dead, telling me some years afterwards how the pressures built up. And he said, poor lady, she didn't even have time to cry. This, I think, shows what it is to be a sovereign or a sovereign's widow.
For a time, she felt really as though her mainspring had been broken. That it was Winston Churchill who got in touch with her and interested her in her regiments and so on.
But apart from one engagement with her family regiment, the Black Watch, she retreated into a personal exile to face the sharpness of her tragedy.
On active service.
Another thing that she did was to buy the Castle of May in the very far distant, remote parts of Scotland. And she restored this wonderful romantic place. She'd always been interested in Scottish history and wildlife. And so she was doing two things. She was, by retreating there, she was restoring her own strength, and also she was saving something of great beauty and value which might have disappeared altogether.
We are watching the documentary on the Queen Mother. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me telling you this. And watching with us from London, Christopher Warwick and Graham Turner, two royal biographers in our London studio. Gentlemen, as we reflect on those early years, it seems incredible, at least as I sit here watching it, and you perhaps had the same reaction, that a woman so right for the times could have been in the job as the Queen of to King George at a time when The world was flying into tumult, and she couldn't have known what was happening. Was this the case of the right person at the right time?
I think it was. I mean, she'd seen, of course, the terrible things of the First World War. She'd lost a brother during the First World War, so she knew a little of what war was about. And she was also a natural actress. I mean, as a young woman, she actually wanted to be an actress. And so that, in a sense, carried her through a lot of things. I think it's worth saying that she absolutely loathed Mrs. Simpson, and that continued right to the end of her life, because she felt that Mrs. Simpson had really taken away her own life, in the end took away her husband's life, and really ruined their family life, because the king didn't want to do the job, felt he couldn't do the job, and it was only with her help that he did it. So in a sense, she was certainly the right person in the right place.
Mr. Warwick, there seems a bit of a paradox in this too, because while she did regard taking on the role of the Queen as an intolerable burden, I believe she described it as that, she then did it so very, very well. How do we explain that?
Oh, I think quite simply it's called duty. I've no doubt that when she, first of all, when she finally accepted the Duke of York's proposal and became Duchess of York in 1923, I don't think that that was a role that she would have wished for herself. Her mother, the Countess of Strathmore, is known to have said rather disparagingly about royalty, well, of course, some people have to be fed royalty as sea lions are fed fish. The Strathmores wanted none of their children to have anything to do with court life. However, that said, then the youngest daughter, of course, did marry the Duke of York. No doubt, I think it was a love that grew. Whether or not it was a love match to begin with, I think is a matter of conjecture that we're not here to discuss. But certainly love grew. She was devoted to this man. She was devoted to supporting him as an individual and as king, don't you think, Graham?
Yes, absolutely. And she had no choice, really.
Had absolutely no choice. No choice.
She was landed with it.
Absolutely. Fait accompli.
Let me ask you both this, if you don't mind, gentlemen, and that is, we did see pictures there of the war years. How much did the Queen Mother contribute to putting the steel in the British people, a lot of which was there and is there naturally anyway, but how much did she contribute to reinforcing that during the war?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Immeasurably,
Absolutely.
immeasurably, because as your report said earlier on, when there was talk of the Queen and the princesses and perhaps even the King leaving England for Canada, and Queen Elizabeth said, my daughters could never leave without me, I could never leave without the King, and the King will never leave. And in fact, the King himself was said to have wanted to have led a kind of a resistance movement had we been overrun. But I think by staying here, as of course so many European monarchs did not stay in their own kingdoms, but by staying here, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, despite, as some of their critics said, yes, well, we've lost our only home, they've got half a dozen palaces. That's neither here nor there.
I think it's worth also saying, there's been a big emphasis on London and going to the East End.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I've talked to some of the Guards officers who were at Windsor with the Queen Mother and the King during the war, and they went out all over the kingdom, not just to London. They would go to Liverpool and Southampton and Coventry, and those Guards officers would see them at the end of their day, having driven up to one of these cities, gone round them, seen all the devastation and came back, and they were absolutely worn out at the end of those days. So they did absolutely pour themselves out.
They did. And in fact, Graham's absolutely right in saying about all the regional visits they did. The one visit that the King wouldn't allow Queen Elizabeth to accompany him on was that to Coventry.
Yes.
He was so horrified, you know.
Right. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to go back into our documentary now. Following the death of her husband, the Queen Mother had to adjust to her new role in the public spotlight, and we know that you're going to be watching this one with us as well. Thank you. And adapt she did to that role. In the second part of our look back on the life of the Queen Mum, we hear about her involvement in the community.
But her unfailing curiosity about people and her sense of duty drew her out. And for nearly half a century more, she was to dedicate herself once again to public life as the Queen Mother. Wherever she went, she diffused formality, cherishing the element of surprise.
May I now ask Your Majesty to unveil a plaque to commemorate your visit?
Before I formally open this building, what do you think? I'm going to ask the headmaster to declare a holiday to mark my visit.
It was the creation of Dundee University, which used to be part of St Andrews, but got an independent life around the end of the 60s. And it was a time of student unrest everywhere. And probably Scotland got it a tiny bit later than France. As it was true in the days of Mary, Queen of Scots, it was true today too. And the students weren't in a particularly good mood. They were riotous, rather riotous and frisky. And we lined up to appear on the stage, and the Queen Mother was the Chancellor, and I was the first rector. And they pelted us with toilet rolls, but by holding the end of a toilet roll and sending the other bit out like a streamer at a carnival. It was quite a merry occasion. I've never seen them used that way, and it's a thing to keep in mind for the future. But she absolutely steadied the house and made them withdraw by picking these toilet rolls up as though somebody had mislaid them and wondering whether she should throw it back or what to do. And it was so brilliantly done that I saw exactly the kind of qualities then at very close range which had made her so popular, because she was a very unpompous woman.
Each year, the Queen Mother liked to get to know a student from the Royal College of Music rather better than she would if she just came to the college on a formal occasion. And she entrusted me with the task of bringing down to Royal Lodge a student to play to her and to a number of selected guests who were there for the weekend. And these students used to love to see Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, in her own home. They loved to see her pouring out tea like any mother might, not being waited on the whole time by footmen. And one particular occasion I remember with special pleasure was when the footman had brought in the tea and the Queen Mother was pouring out, and he tactfully left the room. The Queen Mother looked around to make quite sure he wasn't there and cut a bit of chocolate cake, it was a beautiful cake, and handed it to the dog down there. And she said to me and to the student, "Don't tell the butler, because he disapproves of my giving the dogs chocolate cake."
She came to open the ward when we finally built the Bud Flanagan Lee Keeperman ward attached to the Marsden, because she had a great affection with the Marsden, because she'd been in there herself. And Martin Gillett said, "You watch her, she's such a pro, just watch her what she'll do." And he forecast exactly what she would do, because the most boring thing for a photographer is to take a picture of somebody signing a visitor's book, because they've got their head down. Just see what she does. And he told me what she would do, and she did it. She got there and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I can't remember the date." And she went, "Can anybody tell me the date?" And each cameraman, click, 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 got the perfect picture, and then she went back and signed it. That was her professionalism.
The Queen Mother.
Good guess.
Not only was she photographed millions of times, she also sat for hundreds of portraits.
I asked her about Augustus John, who was painted a famous portrait of her, which was never finished, which I believe is in Clarence House still. And I said, "Is it true that you had to feed him with drink to keep him going?" She said, "Well, there was a little bottle of brandy, I think, kept in a little cupboard." I'm sure that she did.
No glittering occasion was complete without the Queen Mother's own roadshow. Her tireless attendances at premieres, galas and command performances were much appreciated.
She liked the entertainment business, you know. She was very fond of it. I mean, she used to tell the Crazy Gang that the Victoria Palace, for instance, was her local.
One of the gags the Crazy Gang had was, say you won a prize if you had a little red spot under your seat. Well, they'd put a little red spot under every seat. But unfortunately, Queen Elizabeth asked for a higher chair because she liked her public to see her, quite naturally, because that's what people would come for. So she was in the box in a rather higher chair, and they had admitted to put the little red spot under her chair. So when we were all asked to look if we got a red spot on the chair, everybody put their hands up, hoping they won a prize. And then she found she hadn't got a red spot, and from the box said, I haven't got a spot.
She loved the theatre, and loved all aspects of it. And she, of course, one of her great friends was Sir Noah Coward, and she loved to laugh, and he made her laugh a lot.
They were all sort of getting together in this anteroom before the play started, and unfortunately there'd been a bit of a hitch with the national anthem. They played it a bit too early, so therefore they were, it finished and they weren't quite ready. Anyway, the lights went down with the audience, and they had to then find their seats with the lights down, and they were standing at the top of the stairs. And Noah Coward said, "Go on, ma'am, go on." She said, "I can't go on, you're stepping on my dress."
We like to feel that the ballet was her favourite thing. She liked it more than anything else. She loved all forms of entertainment, but she particularly loved the ballet. Frederick Ashton admired her so much, and he would use her as an example in rehearsals. For instance, in a ballet like The Sleeping Beauty, which was one of her favourites, and he would say, when he was rehearsing, like the entrance of the Queen, the King and the Queen, he would say, you should take as your example the Queen Mother, and always notice how she will never rush. Royalty always moves slowly. And again, she always moved in such a gracious and elegant way. So she did actually have quite an influence.
She'd obviously been told that I was the air raid warden from Dad's army. And she came up, she gave me a long look. She said, "I still watch it, you know." And after she'd gone by, her lady-in-waiting said, "And if she can't watch it, she has it recorded, you know."
Well, I remember an evening fairly recently where we were all told, as usual, to be early, so that it was a part of the whole protocol. And we were, and all the guests were there, and it included Lord Rees-Mogg, for instance, who'd just been appointed a kind of arbiter of taste on the BBC. It wasn't a censor, because people don't like that word anymore. But he was there to see that everything was all right. And suddenly the Queen Mother came in, playing with her pearls, which is the only ever sign of a kind of nervousness that I ever saw. And she went straight up to him, and she said, "I hear that thanks to you, we are not to have sex on television before 9:30 in the evening. You know, it's rather late for me." Well, I mean, that is absolutely irresistible.
And she said, "Do you mind if we have dinner on little tables?" So, of course, we said not. And she said, "Because I don't want to miss Starsky and Hutch." And she said, "They're such nice boys. There is a little violence in it, but they're really very nice boys." And there we were, sitting in front of the television watching Starsky and Hutch having dinner in Royal Lodge.
The tree's a great thing, really. We inherited these marvellous oaks.
It was at Royal Lodge that she had created with the King a wonderful garden.
Or China. They really are all lovely things. It's swell. We like to swell it.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Oh, yes.
Isn't it good? It's good.
Gardening was one of her passions, and for decades she thrilled countless gardeners with her visits and curiosity. Like her brother David before her, she was patron of the Royal Horticultural Society and rarely missed the Chelsea Flower Show.
During the time that the Queen Mother has been patron of the RHS, she has been a very regular visitor to the Chelsea Flower Show and has always astonished everyone, including the exhibitors, with her terrific depth of knowledge of plants and horticulture. She's a terrific plantswoman.
There was a wonderfully sort of vague side to her. I mean, there was definite sort of vagueness, sort of fey side to her, really. And I remember at Chelsea Flower Show at the preview on the year of her 90th birthday. She came along and said hello, and I said, she was carrying a lovely bouquet of very small pink roses, and she said, aren't they pretty? I think somehow that they're sort of something to do with me. I think they've called it a name something to do with me. Can't remember at all what they might have called it. So I said, do you think, Queen Mother? Oh, darling, how clever you are.
She's always said, now look, young man, I've only got half an hour. Make sure I'm in that car in half an hour from now. Yes, ma'am, I'm sure. So she gets into the hall, gets thoroughly stuck into the exhibits, talks to exhibitors, mixes well with people. Half an hour later, I look at my watch and say, ma'am, it's time to go. She says, oh, don't bother me yet. Don't trouble me now. And so an hour, maybe an hour and a half later, she's still in there, beavering away, talking to exhibitors, chatting to people, very reluctant to leave a big hall full of flowers, and absolutely thrilling the daylights out of everyone in the place.
The Queen Mother had the ability to thrill everyone she met.
Before he became an enormous megastar, when we were talking about Elton John, and she didn't know Elton John's music, so she said, well, invite him to dinner. And we took Elton along to Royal Lodge, and he played for an hour, just to 5 or 6 people. And he was very clever because when he came round to singing your song, one of his most favorites, he immediately changed the words and brought the Queen Mother into the words, which she loved.
And of course, being Elton looked wondrously bizarre. At that time, he was into green hair, high platform soled shoes, and she said, you look wonderful.
Yes.
And,
and he was so nervous that he put salt instead of sugar on the dessert.
Yes. But again, that was a wonderful evening because he was very, very nervous going in, ended up being in love with her, which is, I think, what happens to a lot of people.
And when she came to my house, I remember when she had a tremendous program. It was only about 10 years ago. She was going to a Garter ceremony the following day, and she'd been to see the troops back from the Falklands, I think. And she came and went all around my ground floor of my house and had tea with about 12 people. And when she left, she got into the car, and she leant out of the side window and waved a scarf to us like Isolde as she drove away, which was a charming end for the afternoon.
And even those who worked for her were made to feel relaxed and easy.
One felt so comfortable working with her that it was easy to almost overstep the mark. But if one began to do that, there was a real rod of steel there behind the amusement, the sort of light-hearted attitude. She had the most incredible sense of duty, and that overrode absolutely everything. I remember one evening I was discussing some political thing with her, and she said, oh, you ought to be a politician. And I said, well, actually, ma'am, I've often thought I'd like to be a politician, but quite frankly, apart from being far too thick, it takes too much time. It would clash too much with my family life. And I got such a steely look. And she said, no, but whatever you do for the country, that's got to come first.
I would say that she was a mixture of duty and delight, and somebody once gave those two adjectives as a definition of grace. Grace, they said, is a mixture of duty and delight. And her gifts were a wonderful blend of that. And that's why she was the most gracious of queens.
We are watching the documentary, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me telling you this, on the life of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, following the announcement of her death today at the age of 101. And watching with us in our London studio, two gentlemen who are both royal biographers, know this story very well, Graham Turner and Christopher Warwick. Gentlemen, the one thing that comes through in the segment we just saw was that the Queen Mother, and we may be right or wrong about this, but do we understand correctly that she chose to be out and about as much as she was? She could have faded off into limbo, but that was not her style after the death of the King.
No, I mean, I think for one thing, she was very lonely after her husband's death.
Absolutely, yeah.
And she would go to parties at places like Hatfield House, the Salisbury's place, and everybody was wanting to go to bed at 11 o'clock or 11:30. No, she did not want to go to bed. She wanted to dance around the corridors singing songs and so on till 1 or 2 in the morning. And the real truth, I think, was that she was so desperately lonely.
She was.
That she escaped into jollity in a way.
Yes, I think she did. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that half the persona that people recognise today was three-quarters performance, because she'd evolved this. But I know that Graham and I have both been sitting here listening as opposed to watching the documentary and wondering, were we not, when the ounce of reality was going to come in, because you know, you can't, we've got to, this is a lovely documentary, I'm sure, but she was much, much more than this fluffy meringue that you've been portraying. You know, you really cannot hold something like the monarchy together in how many years, Graham? Since more than half a century.
More than half a century.
Without being a very steely and determined individual, and I think it's actually doing Her Majesty a great discredit in Canada to show her just as this fluffy, feather-filled individual, you know.
Well, if I may just interject on that point for a moment, gentlemen. First of all, we have mentioned several times that she has had a lot of steel in her. There was no question about that. And I think what we're seeing today is the kind of reflection of her that people would want during the first few hours after her death. Believe me, we will be hearing a lot over the next week or so about the Queen Mother, and a lot of that will undoubtedly come forward, that she was steely, that she was even aggressive at times, and that certainly in dealing with some of the members of the royal family, she was pretty darn tough. Would you agree?
I mean, she almost, you know, after the death of the King, she almost wanted to go into her shell. And it took Winston Churchill meeting her at Balmoral and giving her what amounted to a good telling off, and telling her that she really couldn't just retire from public life, that her daughter needed her very much, and she couldn't do a Queen Victoria and just pole off. And that really helped her enormously. She realised then that she really was needed in our public life, and she came back very strong, as we've all seen.
Right. Well, what we're going to do now is look at the last part of this, and then we'd like you to comment to a greater extent on some parts of her personality that you alluded to there, about her toughness and about her way with people who wouldn't do what she desired them to do. Some members of the royal family we know very well, of course, were on the wrong end of the Queen Mother's sentiments from time to time. This is the third and final segment of the documentary. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me telling you this. The Queen Mother traveled extensively throughout the Commonwealth and the world, and she was loved and admired everywhere she went.
Mother made over 50 official visits to foreign countries and countless others privately. She's said to have been the most travelled member of any royal family.
She had said how she'd never been to Venice. She'd always wanted to go. And we said, well, we're just about to open this little building. You come and open it for us, you know. So this was all arranged carefully, and she came on the Britannia. And we agreed that it should be in October, because October in Venice is usually an absolutely beautiful month. Of course, it wasn't. It was thick, grey fog, and you couldn't see very much, and what you could see was flat as a pancake. And we were all waiting for her on the Dogana steps, where her little boat was going to come in from the Britannia. And as she came ashore, I said, "Oh, ma'am, I'm so sorry the weather's like this. It's so sad. We wanted to go to sunshine." And she said, "Oh, but don't you think it's so much more fun like this? It's so much more exciting, so much more mysterious, so much more romantic." And she always this wonderful gift of saying the right thing and apparently meaning it, you know. It's said with such speed and determination and conviction. So that made everybody feel a lot better. And then we went to this little oratory, and it's very, very small, and there was only room for very few people, but there's a big church just across the road. And so we went across to the big church for a little sort of consecration service for this thing. And I need hardly tell you that something went wrong, in that some Venetian bigwig, the mayor, thought it was 1:15 instead of 1:45, or one of those things. Anyway, there was about half an hour, during which absolutely nothing happened at all. We just sort of sat waiting. And most people, you know, waiting half an hour, get a little bit sort of nervous and start, you know, fiddling around. And I watched her for half an hour. She was like that, smiling gently. Absolutely not a motion, as if there wasn't a nerve in her body. This total serenity and ease, you know. And it somehow sort of put everybody else at ease, too. I felt she could have gone on like that for hours. It was an extraordinary bit of professionalism, you know, how to deal with a bad moment. You don't just mention it at all. You just look perfectly happy and just sit there.
When she went out to Iran, Persia, she was allotted a driver to drive her car, a Persian driver. And when she went, he was found weeping on the steps of the British Embassy, saying she's gone. And she's the first person I've ever driven who's asked me for pictures of my children and asked me about my wife. And he simply couldn't get over it. But that was absolutely typical of her.
But it was her beloved fatherland that called her back time and time again.
She absolutely adored Scotland, and I think probably, you know, was at her happiest there. I remember a particularly wonderful stay at Balmoral, where my husband was photographing various pictures in the house. There were no grouse that year, and so all the guests were cancelled, and so there was really just the family and my husband and myself. And it was terribly relaxed, and as opposed to dressing up 4 or 5 times a day, you got up into your kilt and you went to bed in your kilt, because it was all one wonderful continuous picnic.
Whatever activity we were doing, and it might be shooting, fishing, or whatever, the Queen Mother would bring the picnic to where we were. It was very rare that we'd go back to the Castle May for lunch. The weather had to be pretty filthy. And many a picnic. I remember the Queen Mother in one of her wonderful raincoats and sort of floppy hats, sitting out in the rain with a drink, absolutely determined to enjoy wherever we were. And we chose some extraordinary spots. But, I mean, they weren't grand picnics. I mean, they were very much the sort of classic Peter Jones picnic table and chairs which kept collapsing. And in fact, one always had to be rather careful to make sure that the chair she used was one of the safest ones. But she was all very keen on exercise, and she was always rushing off after lunch. We would go back to whatever we were doing, and she'd go off for a tremendous long walk to burn off any lunch. She never actually ate a great deal herself, just small. She really picked at her food. No, and we had some good sloe gin and cherry brandy to finish the picnics off. We needed it in those weather conditions.
She also pursued her hobbies and sporting interests with the same enthusiasm that she put into her public life.
Someone had invited her to go fishing. There was this chap, Major Cook, and his gilly. And the gilly was going to show her where to fish and where were the best spots where, etc., and look after her for the day. And I would imagine that Major Cook had obviously been briefing the gilly and saying, now when the Queen Mum arrives, you do this and do that, and take the Queen Mum down to that pool or whatever. And he obviously thought that that the Queen Mum was the correct form of address. Because we got out of the Land Rover and Major Cook said, good morning, ma'am, or whatever, may I introduce my gilly? And he immediately said, hello, Queen Mum. And he didn't just say it once, but he kept saying it at the end of every sentence. And he would say, now, Queen Mum, we're going on this pool down here. Now, have you got your rods, Queen Mum, and I'll take them for you. And the amusing thing was that she thought this incredibly funny, and she looked at Major Cook and me, and you saw that sort of glint in her eye, which meant she found it very amusing. But she wasn't going to offend him, the gilly. She was quite happy being called Queen Mum, didn't mind at all.
But it was the horses, her darlings, as she used to say, that were her passion.
I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that she's the best thing that's happened to national hunt racing since the Second War. Because up till that war, it had been very much the poor relation. It still is, sadly, the poor relation economically, but it had been the poor relation in terms of prestige. It was regarded as the sport of the needy and greedy, or at any rate, the highfalutin flat race people called it that. She dignified the sport. She raised its standing. Her presence did make the day.
Her stables produced over 400 winners. Household names such as Double Star, Mackledar, Special Cargo, and of course the ill-fated Devon Loch. She followed racing all over the country, from Folkestone to Fontwell, Aintree to Ascot. She could be seen receiving a trophy almost as often as she was seen presenting one.
The winner in great style here.
When she wasn't on the course, she kept in touch with results from inside her London home, Clarence House, through the specially installed Bookies blower.
Strangely enough, we often talked about horse racing. I found that she was a great admirer of a racehorse owner called Jim Joel, who was a neighbour of mine in St Albans, and we shared a great affection and admiration for him, and he certainly loved the Queen Mother, and he was a very successful racehorse owner. When he died, he left in his will that she should have a choice of any horse that she cared to choose, and she chose a very good one.
We had a horse called Isle of Man, and the lad, Pete Stanman, was away. So apparently he used to bite him a lot, so at the races anyway. So this particular day I had to show him. So she walked in the box and she says, has he bitten you yet? So I said, no, Mum, I don't give him a chance. So her face, you know, creased up in laugh, and she says, well, don't you think it's an honour to let him bite you then? So I said, well, whoever owns them, they hurt just as much. And she thought that was marvellous, you know, she kept chuckling to herself.
Every year, the nation kept an appointment with her birthday on August the 4th. She regularly appeared outside Clarence House, accompanied by her family. On her 80th birthday, the nation paid a very special tribute to her.
Queen Mother has, over the years, helped us to feel that being a citizen of this country is not just being an entry on the central computer or being an income tax code number,
but it is being a member of a family where common interests and kinships exist beneath and beyond all our divisions and conflicts. The Queen Mother has shown a human face which has called out the loyalty and the sense of belonging without which a nation loses its heart and disintegrates.
After that address in St. Paul's, she was obviously moved by the service, and whereas often she would speak to me immediately afterwards about the service, she was quite tongue-tied then. It was about the only time when I found her slightly at a loss for words.
Of the many celebrations to mark her 80th birthday, one was to bring her face to face with the East End once again. She was made an honorary porter at Smithfield Market.
I said to her, "Good morning, Mum." She came over, I kissed her hand, and I said, "My name's Jerry." I was good looking then. And then she just asked me how long I'd worked on the market, what I'd been doing all night. I told her what I'd been doing, cutting pigs up. And I'd also told her that I wasn't supposed to be here in a dirty smock. She laughed. It was unbelievable, it was. And she took everything in fun and in jest. It was good, and in fact, I mean, she was 10 minutes, quarter of an hour late because they have a time to go through the market. And she was late in doing what she was supposed to be doing because we held her up. She was terrific. In all that she don't want to see it, she does. She wants to get involved. Oh, she's a lovely woman. Terrific. Jerry. Well done. Hey!
I always remember on her 90th birthday, there was a party on the Royal Yacht to which I was invited, and the Queen Mother had been in the East End talking to victims of the Blitz and having it over with them, the old times, and obviously oblivious of time, so that she was late, and she arrived together with her aides, and when she went to get ready for the party for a few minutes, they both came across and flung themselves down in a chair. One of them said, "Well, my God, I don't know the effect on her, but I'm totally knackered." That was a very hot day, and they were very exhausted. But in a few moments, she appeared with a drink in her hand, as serene as ever. It was an amazing performance.
The Queen Mother continued with her duty tirelessly. Even into her 90s, she would accept over 50 engagements a year.
I name this boat the Faithless. And all good luck.
Her staff were under strict instructions to keep her informed about everything. And her family also supported her in her determination to lead a normal life, which included having successful hip replacement surgery at the age of 97. As a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, she supported her whole family at times of great sadness. And conversely, her great age brought very special rewards, moments of great joy, such as her daughter's golden wedding anniversary. And her eldest grandson's 50th birthday.
Charles, happy birthday.
The Queen Mother appealed to every generation. Following her 98th birthday, a particularly poignant tribute was paid to her by her daughter in the Queen's Christmas broadcast.
It is not always easy for those in their teens or 20s to believe that someone of my age, of the older generation, might have something useful to say to them. But I would say that my mother has much to say to me. Indeed, her vigour and enjoyment of life is a great example of how to close the so-called generation gap. She has an extraordinary capacity to bring happiness into other people's lives.
And in the millennium year, the nation rejoiced as she celebrated a very special birthday, her 100th.
I was someone who actually produced her 80th, 90th, and 100th birthday. I was sitting here one day, and my PA said the telephone had rung, and the Hastings Winkle Club were on the telephone, and they wanted to know if they could come to the pageant. And I looked down the list of her things and saw they weren't actually they weren't one of her charities. So I thought, well, you know, so I said I'd let them know. And by chance, I was having lunch with Queen Elizabeth that day, and so I thought it'd be a good conversation piece for lunch, and if nothing else. And so I said to her, you know, ma'am, the Hastings Winkle Club has been on the telephone. Oh, yes, she said, I am a Winkle. I thought, really? He said, yes, I am a Winkle. And if you're a Winkle, you have to wear your Winkle badge, because if another Winkle comes up to you and goes Winkle, Winkle with his badge, you have to go Winkle, Winkle back, otherwise you pay a fine. And that's how they make their money. So she said, I must make certain I wear my Winkle badge that day. So they were in, as long as they brought some Winkles for us, which we'd rather like them.
Before her 101st birthday, she became ill, but her powers of recovery, combined with a determination to attend the celebrations, ensured that her health returned. She was the people's queen, so dearly loved by those who knew her and by those who only knew of her. And she'll be remembered for her remarkable contribution to the life of the country that she served for so long.
So there it is, the story of the people's queen, the documentary. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me telling you this. Our royal biographers are still standing by in London to comment on other aspects of her life. We have a short time, gentlemen, Mr. Warwick and Mr. Turner, to talk about that period of her life which surely surrounded her with turmoil, involving Diana, Princess of Wales, Prince Charles and his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. Now, we never heard her comment on any of that. What was her reaction to all of that from your point of view, Mr. Turner? First.
Well, I think she was one of the earliest who thought that Princess Diana simply would not do. She thought that Diana, having been brought up in a kind of royal setting, really, should have understood what it involved taking on a membership of the royal family. And I think she felt that as time went on, Diana was really not fitting in, and indeed causing Charles great unhappiness. And I think she was one of the first in the royal family to feel this really wasn't working out as it ought to have done. And of course, she was the person alone in the royal family to whom Prince Charles felt he could talk. He's never really felt he could talk either to his mother or his father about the deepest things in his life, and it was always to the Queen Mother that he turned. And I think she gave him real help and succour at a time when his morale was really very low as that marriage broke apart.
Mr. Warwick, we understand that the Queen Mother spent a lot of time talking with Diana in the early days especially. What sort of thing would she have said to her, and what would she have said to her when the whole situation seemed to be unraveling?
Well, I'm not actually certain that she'd have said a great deal to her, to be perfectly honest. You know, there's no training ground here. It's not a case of, now come on, dear, sit down. These are the rules. I think the Queen Elizabeth would have been extremely unhappy, as Graham has so rightly pointed out. at the way the younger members of the royal family conducted themselves.
Yes.
I think that we hear, with the greatest of respect, much too much of Diana's side of this story. She made certain that we did. But we have, I think with the Queen Mother would have been very, very sad indeed. You know, this is something, the monarchy is an institution that the Queen Mother worked for 80 years to uphold.
Yes.
And the younger members came along, the Sarah Fergusons, the Diana Spencers of this world, and quite frankly didn't know how to behave.
I mean, after Diana died, the Queen Mother was driving into Balmoral, and a policeman at the gate had said to her that, well, at least now the boys won't be pulled in two directions. And the Queen Mother said, I think that is a very wise comment, because the young princes were definitely being pulled in two directions.
Gentlemen,
and sad as she may have been about Diana's death, she could see that at least the boys were now going to be pointing in one direction towards their father.
Mr. Warwick and Mr. Turner, thank you.
And their destiny.
Thank you very, very much for being with us today. We very much appreciate it. John Amers of the Monarchist League of Canada is still with us. Mr. Amers, I'd like you to deal with one point for us as we wrap up our conversations here, and that is the question of just what the death of the Queen Mother is going to mean now for the Queen. She is the senior member of the royal family. She has the support of Prince Philip, of course, but in a sense, she's going it alone now.
Yeah, I think it has a very tough effect on the Queen, Lloyd. First of all, she's lost her sister, now the Queen Mother. She has, of course, as you say, the Duke of Edinburgh to rely upon, but the celebrations of Jubilee are going to be muted for her, I'm sure, and overshadowed by this double loss. And secondly, just as one finds it easiest sometimes to confide with people of a different generation, I think clearly the Queen Mother was a wonderful confidant for the Queen. I understand from your earlier guests that the Queen was with her this morning. So I think she will find it a lonelier throne. There will be inevitably increased talk of abdication. I don't think the Queen will countenance herself, but there will be talk. There will be a time of unsettlement and of looking backwards instead of looking forwards, which the Jubilee was supposed to accomplish. So I think a very difficult year for the Queen. But the Queen has her mother's steel, and I'd predict, Lloyd, that she will be received paradoxically and maybe ironically with even greater public support and affection for the Golden Jubilee celebrations, both in Britain and in Canada, because people will feel great sympathy for her.
Mr. Amers, thank you very much to our guests, John Amers of the Monarchist League of Canada, Graham Turner and Christopher Warwick in London, royal biographers. Well, this was a huge news story today, of course, but there was another running story that we want to touch on before we leave you on this CTV News special. We're going to turn to the crisis in the Middle East. There was another suicide bomber today, this time in Tel Aviv, in a busy, crowded restaurant. At least 20 people were wounded. A militant Palestinian group has claimed responsibility. In the meantime, in the city of Ramallah, Yasser Arafat remains in isolation in his compound. CTV's Tom Kennedy is standing by in Jerusalem. Tom?
Lloyd, this vicious cycle of violence here, it continues. There was another bomb today, as you mentioned. There were more casualties, and it couldn't have happened in a busier place. Evening, right in the center of Tel Aviv, an area packed with stores, bars, and people. A suicide bomber walked into a coffee shop, then a huge bang. There was glass all over the street. Injured, still able to walk, went to find treatment. Those who could not waited to be found. For Israel, this is more justification for its invasion of Palestinian territories. All day, it's order to those still resisting. Hands on your head, lay down on the ground, don't move. Scenes like this throughout the territories. More than a dozen people killed, many more wounded, among them people trying to help.
We have a driver of a ambulance who was shot at. He's lying behind me. By the way, I don't know whether he knows English or not, but his wife was also killed.
Well over 100 Palestinians have been arrested, among them Sahir Habash, an aide to Yasser Arafat.
The Palestinian people will stand with his leader, and
with their intifadas. Arafat himself remains under siege in his mostly destroyed compound. No electricity, no water, pleading for help.
I am appealing to the whole international world to stop this aggression against our people.
And at the United Nations, after an unusually long Security Council meeting, a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire and for Israel to withdraw from Palestinian territories.
Both sides need to adopt policies that reinforce the prospects for a political process leading to peaceful settlement.
But Israel continues to say military action will not end until terror is defeated.
We will not accept this Palestinian terrorist effort against us. We will not accept that the blood of our children will be spilled in the streets of our cities.
In fact, even as the United Nations called for a withdrawal, Israel was expanding its operations, moving further into Palestinian territory. And every time international pressure mounts on Israel to back down, there seems to be another bomb, another attack, more civilian casualties. Rarely has a solution for this troubled region seemed so hopeless. Lloyd.
Tom, what would the Israelis consider an end point at this stage? Is there any point at which they would be prepared to say, okay, we've gone far enough, we've done enough damage now, we can pull out? Do you see that anywhere in this equation?
No, except for the official stance of the Israeli government. When Ariel Sharon, the prime minister, announced what he calls a war on terror, he said it would continue until the threat of terrorism was stamped out. He said no nation could stand by while civilians were being killed by these suicide bombers. The Israeli government repeated that today, even after that United Nations resolution calling for a withdrawal. The government repeated that it is going to continue. It will continue the surrounding, the besieging of Arafat's headquarters. They will continue their operations until this threat of terror is lifted. Now, the problem is, when is that threat of terror going to be lifted? There is just no sign of it. As I said, this cycle of violence just seems to continue.
Now, there has been talk in some quarters today about a possible multinational force moving in there between the two sides. What would the Israelis and the Palestinians think about that? Is there any indication of a response to that kind of thing from there?
No, there's been no response to that yet. The one issue that did come up in a vague kind of way, that perhaps the American envoy here in Israel, who's been trying to work on a ceasefire, perhaps he could go into Ramallah, into the area where, into Yasser Arafat's headquarters, talk to Yasser Arafat, then speak to the Israelis, and then perhaps then try to work out some kind of ceasefire. But an international force, I think really the impression here is that if that does happen, if it happens, it's a long way down the road.
And the question is, how can the world, to some extent, keep the lid on this from spreading out into larger territory in the Arab world in the meantime? That's another big question, is it not?
It is a big question, and it has many, many people worried, because if it does spread, then really who knows what would happen here. In fact, just as this military operation, the Israeli operation, was beginning, one commentator was saying that if damage, if Arafat is injured or if he is killed, really it is totally unpredictable where this will go. Now, of course, that hasn't happened. Israel has said that it will not harm Arafat. So again, a solution, it just seems, right now, it seems hopeless.
Tom, thank you very much. Tom Kennedy in Jerusalem tonight. Sandy Ronaldo will have much more on this story with the CTV National News tonight. And we will also be telling you much more about the Queen Mother's death today. That all on CTV News tonight. We're going to end by going back to some pictures in London at the end of the day when it was announced that Queen Mother had died peacefully in her sleep.
CTV, Canadian television.
my husband.
With Big Ben in the background, a solemn moment in London as we watch the gun carriage being moved into position at the Queen's Chapel, St. James Palace, for the transfer of the Queen Mother's coffin from St. James to Westminster Hall, a procession that will take about a half an hour. All of these units now moving into position at St. James. Crowds silent along route, especially as they watch this gun carriage move into position, the same carriage that carried the late Queen's husband, King George VI, in 1952. Good morning, I'm Lloyd Robertson, reporting from London from our location, looking out over the Thames to the Palace of Westminster and the Houses of the British Parliament. You can see behind me the familiar collection of towers, including the famous Big Ben, which we've just heard ringing 11 o'clock here, a symbol for so many Canadians for so many years of the life and times of Great Britain, especially during the war years. Today marks another important turning point in the long cycle of mourning for the Queen Mother. It is a 10-day period which began last Saturday and continues until next Tuesday morning. And today, in a colorful and majestic gesture, the Queen Mother comes to the people. After all, over the last few days, she has been at the Queen's Chapel at St. James Palace, where friends, family, and dignitaries have had an opportunity to pay their final respects. Now the Queen Mother comes out to the people this morning and to the Houses of Parliament, the people's representatives. And this means that the Queen Mother is back among the people she loved so much here in Great Britain and throughout the Commonwealth, for that matter. CTV's Lisa LaFlamme has been here in London for the past few days, covering for Canada AM, and Lisa is outside Westminster Hall this morning, which will be the focus of activities as the procession moves there. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Lloyd. And as you say, she comes to the people, and the first of the people actually lined up last night at about 6:30 p.m. and slept outside so that they could be first in line, because it'll be 2 o'clock local time when the public is finally allowed to go in, file past the coffin, and pay their last respects. And most significantly, standing here just beside Westminster Hall, the place where monarchs, consorts, and very rarely distinguished statesmen have also laid in state, and the last person was Sir Winston Churchill back in 1965, so you can definitely feel the history all around this area.
Yes, and there will be a lot of references to those who have lain in state there, Lisa, including King George VI, of course, in 1952, Winston Churchill in 1965, and others before that, including Gladstone. Now, you've been here for a few days, and it's sort of been business as usual in old London town up until now, but one would think that today you'd feel the emotion coming up from the crowds as they watch the gun carriage move through the streets of London to a greater extent than over the last few days.
I would certainly agree with that, Lloyd. Certainly for me, the most significant moment was standing in front of Buckingham Palace when the Queen Mother was brought from Windsor to London, and there were thousands of people standing in front of Buckingham to watch the procession as it moved by, and a hush fell over the crowd. There was a lot of emotion at that moment, and I should think today, when we see members of the royal family actually following the Queen Mother's casket, we will see a lot more emotion from the family, from the people, as you say, who are now lining the streets and have been for many hours to witness this historic occasion.
Thank you, Lisa. As we look at this picture with the procession at St. James's Palace, St. James on the left, that small white building on the right is the Queen's Chapel. The gun carriage moving to that location, and that is where, in a very short time, in about 5 minutes from now, the Queen Mother's coffin will be borne out and placed on the gun carriage. We have a map to show you to put things into perspective of just where the procession will go this morning. It will take about a half an hour to get from one place to the other as it comes out of St. James Palace, following the dotted line there, turns left and goes up the Mall towards Horse Guard Road, and then over to Whitehall through Horse Guards Parade and down Whitehall to Parliament Square, turning left into the Palace of Westminster and to Westminster Hall. An historic route all the way. It will be one of those mornings that we treasure in our history because so much of it will be pomp and ceremony, a kind of pomp and ceremony that the Queen Mother loved so much, even though she was so gentle and genuine and a real person in her own way. She was not one who spent a lot of time worrying about pomp and ceremony, but she certainly loved to watch it. With me as we cover this event this morning, two royal biographers who've I'm sure are familiar to our CTV audiences. First of all, Lady Ingrid Seward over here on my immediate left, far left, I should say. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you, Ingrid. And Christopher Warwick, who was with us the day of the Queen Mother's death, and nice to have you back, sir.
Thank you.
Now, we talk about the Queen Mother loving pomp and ceremony. This will probably be something we haven't seen in London for many, many years, this event today, which is roughly half, what might be called half of the Queen Mother's funeral, because this is the processional part.
Well, I've just been across the other side of the river, and there's a wonderful atmosphere there. People are smiling, even the policemen are smiling. And it's a really warm atmosphere. The crowds are gathering, and most people, I mean, if you think about it, a lot of the people there today have never seen anything like this in their lives. There's lots of young children, parents dragging them along, but they're going to really be impressed because it's going to be extremely moving.
Now, this, Christopher, is going to be a royal ceremonial funeral, which isn't quite up to a state funeral. It doesn't have quite the pomp and ceremony of a state funeral, but I'm sure most people would never notice because, as Ingrid says, they haven't seen anything like this in years anyway.
You won't even see the join, and I think that the difference between a state funeral and a ceremonial funeral is that had it been a state funeral, then the gun carriage would be drawn by naval ratings, not horse-drawn by the King's Troop of the Royal Horse Artillery. That, I think, is probably the only difference between a state funeral and a ceremonial funeral.
Now, as we look out and we see the procession forming up and the people along the route, what's your feeling about the mood in London over the last few days, and whether it will in fact change today to be more solemn or more involved in the proceedings?
I think it'll be very solemn because we're going to hear the funeral march. And in fact, they will be walking in time to a slightly speeded up version of the funeral march. And
yes, that's because, as I understand it, Ingrid, they're going to be going at 70 paces a minute. The normal funeral pace is 60 paces a minute. So the bands have to speed up.
They have to speed up slightly. And I think the great solemn feeling will come with the music. It's very evocative. And although people are feeling happy, it's with great homage, I think, today. It's not like when Diana died 5 years ago. There was a feeling of anger in the air almost. But today, everyone's united, and all their thoughts are with the Queen and her family.
Pictures of the formation of the procession outside Queen's Chapel. Now, this stretches down the Mall for some distance. And as the carriage is brought out, of course, the other units fall in behind it. And we might mention at this time that there are several Commonwealth units in this grouping. There are three in fact, from South Africa. There is a New Zealand group, the Royal New Zealand Army Medical Corps, the Australian Medical Corps, and then 3 sections from the Canadian Forces, the Canadian Forces Medical Services, the Toronto Scottish Regiment, a fine, proud old regiment, and the Black Watch Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, a fixture of Canadian military tradition since 1862, and we will see them this morning in their full dress marching in this procession. First cars leaving Buckingham Palace now with members of the royal family. These are carrying some of the 14 members of the royal family who will be involved in the procession. First car carrying Prince Philip. The Duke of York, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Prince of Wales, the Earl of Wessex, Prince Michael of Kent, the Duke of Gloucester. All of these people we perhaps know better as Andrew, Edward, Charles, Commodore Timothy Lawrence, husband of the Princess Royal, Princess Anne. And this was the big news event of yesterday, the fact that the Princess Royal, Anne, will in fact be following along behind the coffin this morning. The first woman ever to do so, because It may seem strange and a real anachronism in today's society, but certainly there she is, Princess Royal in naval uniform, a big tribute to feminism here, because in the past, only men have been involved in these kinds of ceremonials. Only men. Strange, isn't it, Ingrid?
It is actually, Princess Anne, or the Princess Royal is her full title, is actually a Rear Admiral, and she's wearing the uniform of a Rear Admiral. But she asked her mother, the Queen, if it would be possible for her to take part in this ceremony, and obviously her wish was granted. But it is a big sort of bow for women, really. But Princess Anne is in charge of the naval section of the women's forces.
Lisa LaFlamme has someone with her to talk to at the moment down in front of Westminster Hall. Lisa?
As you say, Lloyd, there are 3 Canadian regiments as part of this very impressive procession. I'm joined now by 2 from the Scottish Regiment, Commanding Officer Lieutenant Colonel Julian Chapman, and also Chief Warrant Officer Kevin Junior. First of all, tell me, if you can, Colonel, the significance of the Queen Mother to the Toronto Scottish Regiment.
Well, the Queen Mother's been a Colonel-in-Chief for the last 65 years, and so she's been a part and parcel and the fabric of our very regiment. She embodies the values of the regiment, and she has stood by us, and we've stood by her for the past 65 years. So. And Officer Junior, you have met her on several occasions. Tell me about those experiences for you in the past.
Well, it's been my privilege as a young private, after joining the regiment in 1981, to be on the first guard for her. My sergeant major scared me that much that I was terrified to stand there. But when she appeared, I was so much at ease that it was beautiful. And we hear that so often, that she had the ability to speak to everybody to their level, no matter what position they were in the military. So you had that sense also. Yes, and I mean, just her presence allowed everyone to feel so relaxed, which was lovely. And then further, I was able to participate in her 90th birthday and her 100th birthday. And now I'm the command officer myself. After doing both of those, we're now here to see her go. Let's talk a little bit about that then, very quickly, if you can tell me the preparation for the Canadians that are very much a part of this. Well, it was a bit of a mad scramble. Of course, we got the word very quickly, and had to get the 4 members of our regiment over here as quickly as possible, get them the time off from their jobs, because there was no warning. So they had to give up their civilian jobs, say goodbye to the families very quickly, and get over here and start the rehearsals down in Uxbridge with all the other regiments that are taking part in the procession today. So it's been a bit of a scramble from their standpoint. Well, we thank you both so much for joining us and giving us a sense, anyway, of what this day means for you. And I didn't actually ask you how you feel about this day. Well, today is a very sad day for the regiment. It's 65 years is a long period of time. There was this tremendous bond with the Colonel-in-Chief. She loved Canada. She loved the regiment. And so we're deeply saddened, and I'm running out of words to describe how I feel today. I think a lot of people feel the same way, and thanks to both of you for joining us. And Lloyd, there you have it, a lot of people running out of words to say, a very sad moment here, so I'll throw it back to you in the studio.
Lisa, you were talking there about the bond the Queen Mother has with so many of these groups, and we saw there a moment ago a large contingent from the British Legion marching into position near the procession here. And we saw there just a glimpse of some of the organizers of this procession. And this procession is organized to a fairly well, as you might imagine, because we have 28 minutes to get from one location to the other, I'm told by the military, and there will be a gun salute every minute from step off until stop at Westminster Hall. It looked as though the commander was about to give us some sort of command there, but not just yet, because we're moments away from the stepping off of the procession. Just getting into position now as the various troops close up and form up and get set to go. It's now 11:15. That's the quarter tone you're hearing, and quarter of an hour left before they're beginning to step off. So the gun carriage in position, all is set. Ingrid and Christopher, as we watch this, we're reminded that the Queen Mother certainly loved pomp and ceremony, even though she was open and gregarious and was not very pompous herself.
Well, absolutely right. But of course, being a member of the royal family for, what, 80 years, being Colonel-in-Chief of regiments in her own right, accompanying her husband to goodness knows how many military parades, pomp and ceremony and pomp and pageantry was a huge part, of course, of being part of the royal family. So she was quite used to this.
And she really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Certain pieces of music she particularly enjoyed, and she was very moved by it, moved by all this military, as indeed all the royal family are.
Did I hear correctly one time that she did have some dramatic work in her background, and that she was able to emote and show her emotions more easily in some of these situations than some of the more stolid royals may have been able to do or may be able to do? Not overly done ever, but just the right kind of tone, just the right kind of touch and look when she was out on the parade square.
Well, she was always the consummate actress. In fact, to be a member of the royal family, you really have to be an actor or an actress because your real feelings mustn't show. But I think that she's always really stood for and taken part in everything like this.
The long look down the Mall. First members of the royal family now, the Prince of Wales and Andrew, going into Queen's Chapel. Followed by William and Harry and the boys. Shaking hands with the Bishop of London, who is also the chaplain of the Queen's Chapel.
So all the members of the royal family are in full ceremonial uniform, those that are allowed to wear it. And as Prince Charles is a rear admiral, Princess Anne's a rear admiral, Andrew is a commander, and Prince Philip is an admiral.
Now, from what I can see, Christopher and Ingrid, the crowds are not actually in the St. James Palace complex. They're outside, gathered around the gates to the palace, and they'll be able to get a very good view when the time comes.
What we see here, Lloyd, behind the Queen's Chapel, which is here on the right of the screen, and the gun carriage, you've actually got people standing in Pall Mall, which runs parallel to the Mall, which of course is where everybody will get the best view. Those in Pall Mall, you see them at the back there. They'll only have a rather restricted view. As you say, what we're seeing here is called Marlborough Road, and you'll see St. James's Palace, Friary Court of St. James's Palace on the left-hand side. On the right, the Queen's Chapel of St. James's, which sits inside the grounds of Marlborough House, which is where Queen Mary, who was the last Queen Consort, and indeed the first Queen Consort to lie in state of Westminster Hall, lived.
We might just try to set the stage here for people who I think might like to know at this stage. This was really the complex of the Queen Mother's life. Clarence House, St. James Palace, Marlborough House, the area in which she spent the last several years of her life after the death of her husband, and she had to move out of Buckingham Palace.
She certainly did. Not forgetting, of course, that she lived at Buckingham Palace, the war years notwithstanding, from 1936 to 1952. Then, as you so rightly say, to Clarence House from 1952 until today. Marlborough House, further down the Mall, had become a kind of dower house because this is where Queen Mary lived in her widowhood, where she died in 1953. What we're seeing here is the view down the Mall towards Buckingham Palace.
Now that fellow's name is Perry Mason, by the way, the Sergeant Major. Couldn't have a better name for a Sergeant Major than Perry Mason. And we will see him giving his commands for the stepping off of this procession.
And he wears his red sash because he's also the duty sergeant.
1,700 service personnel marching, 900 paces in length, at 70 paces a minute, and 9 paces apart. The Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Household Cavalry, the Foot Guards, other Army units, and the Royal Air Force. Lots of music, 21 half companies lining the streets, 4 bands from the Royal Marines and the Foot Guards. And you noted there a moment ago, the guns being set up in Green Park nearby. There will be a gun salute every minute from the time the procession departs St. James Palace at 11:30 over here. 6 hours time difference now between here and Canada. It changes this weekend, by the way, to 5 when Canada moves on to daylight time.
Royal Navy marching detachments, Guards Division bands, charge! Royal Navy marching detachments, slow! Arms!
Christopher Warwick wanted to make a note here about the Queen Mother's personal standard, which will be on the coffin, Christopher.
Which will be on the coffin, and it's draped her coffin, of course, since she left Royal Lodge on Easter Sunday. But we saw just now the standard, Queen Mother standard, flying at half-mast from her residence, Clarence House, and of course it is sadly the last time we'll see that standard flying again.
Members of the Queen Mother's household here. And behind them, the gold braid of the Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Sir Michael Boyce, Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Peter Quire, and the Chief of the Naval Staff, General Sir Michael Jackson. And Jackson represents the Chief of the General Staff, who takes his own position at the front. What a moment. The crown, worn by the Queen Mother at the time of her coronation.
Yes.
In 1937.
Made entirely of platinum.
Made entirely of platinum.
Contains the legendary Koh-i-Noor diamond and made of 2,800 other diamonds.
The Koh-i-Noor is 106 carats, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it is.
That must take some security.
Personal standard over the bier at the top of the coffin. And the inevitably the bouquet of flowers. Very carefully placed on the gun carriage. Same carriage used to carry the body of King George VI when he died in 1952, predeceasing his wife by 50 years. Prince of Wales in the uniform of an Admiral of the Fleet. And he had some very moving words to say about his grandmother the other day. He was totally devastated, as he said, and he will miss her very much. He was very, very attached to the Queen Mother. There again, the crown, the Kohinoor diamond at the top. It's a priceless diamond in the Maltese cross. William, the prince, standing behind his father. And over on the right,
Royal
Prince Harry.
Navy marching detachments and Guards division bands will advance. About turn.
In a moment, this great procession will be ready to make its stately journey to Westminster Hall. And just to note again some of the Commonwealth components, the Witwatersrand Rifles from South Africa will lead off, followed by the Transvaal Scottish, also from South Africa, then the Cape Town Highlanders. The South Africans will be followed by the New Zealanders and the Australians, and then come the Canadians. And among the honorary pallbearers this morning, marching beside the coffin, Brigadier Gary Burnett, a colonel of the Black Watch Royal Highland Regiment of Canada. If we can pick him out, I'll try to spot him for you, but he will be second after the group captain John Fines, the commandant of the Central Flying School, who will be on the left side of the coffin, right as we look down on it here. The Black Watch here in their tartans with their balmorals and those red hackles that sit up like feathers on those caps. The Royal Canadian Medical Corps and the Toronto Scottish in their hodden gray uniforms. The same ones worn by the London Scottish, with the tartan selected to reflect the heather tones of Scotland, of course, noting the Scottish connection of the Queen Mother. Prince Harry there. A moment of great stillness. The Queen Mother wore that crown at her daughter's coronation in 1953. Now we understand that we're 1 minute away from the procession setting off. And for those of you tuning in Canada, this will be one of those majestic, colorful British ceremonies, the like of which we see so very, very rarely these days. And there hasn't been one like this in London, most people are saying, since the funeral of Winston Churchill in 1965. This is a royal ceremonial funeral, which is really just one notch down from a full state funeral. But most people wouldn't notice the difference in terms of the pomp and ceremony, I'm told, because it will be precise, it will be majestic, and it will be moving. there for the last time. There for the last time, the Queen Mother's personal standard moving from the half-mast down the pole at Clarence House at St. James Palace. Mounted police at the head of the procession. Members of the royal family all behind the coffin. William, Harry, Duke of Edinburgh, flanked on either side by the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal, Princess Anne. Estimate for this event, worldwide television, is 200 million people. And while we can't at this moment see the Queen anywhere, in case you're wondering, she is going by car from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall directly, leaving at 11:42 London time in about 7 minutes from now. Watching history with this picture. The Princess Royal in her naval uniform, marching to the left of the Duke of Edinburgh. And along behind, nephews of the Queen Mother, members of her own family, the Bowes-Lyon family, Simon Bowes-Lyon, her great-nephew, Bowes-Lyon family making up the line directly in front of the casket. I'm sorry, directly behind the casket. see very clearly Prince Edward right there because of the angle of the camera. He is to the left beside Princess Anne. So that makes up the first row, and then the others follow behind with the Queen Mother's family in the last row of the procession, just to clarify where people are walking when you get a full look at the picture. George VI, his statue, up the Mall, looking down on this procession. "50 years ago, King George VI died, and a procession through the streets of London of this nature, more elements unlikely that day, but the same kind of somber tone. The bearskin hats prominent on the uniforms of the guards. Well, not quite that one. Through the arch of the Horse Guards building, the head of the procession moves into Whitehall now, and we saw the house of Marlborough House, the named after the Duke of Marlborough, that famous name in British history, held off the forces of Louis XIV at Blenheim all those years ago, and is well marked, well remembered throughout London with statues, buildings named after him. This is the center of the procession, looking back down the Mall toward Buckingham Palace. Just a few comments from our two guests about the nature of the procession, what we're seeing this morning, the obvious somber, quiet mood of the crowds. Christopher and Ingrid, would you like to comment?
Certainly is. We thought, of course, that the crowds would be more somber, but what is very interesting, of course, is to see here all the members of the Queen Mother's family who are walking behind the coffin, including David, Viscount Linley, the late Princess Margaret's son, Princess Margaret's son-in-law, Daniel Chatto, and, of course, the Duke of Gloucester, the Duke of Kent, and the bearded figure of Prince Michael of Kent. 14 members of the Queen Mother's family.
And then the Bowes-Lyon family, which are her unroyal side of the family, which is the Earl of Strathmore. When he comes in the picture, we'll tell everybody which one he is. And then his son, who is the youngest person in the parade, is only 15 years old, a schoolboy at Harrow. Wonderful how that Cornwall diamond catches the light, Christopher, isn't it? Because when it was originally brought to this country for the Great Exhibition in 1851, the British people complained it wasn't glittery enough. So it went to the Crown Jewellers, Garrard, and was polished up. And it lost quite a lot of carats during the polishing.
And it's lovely to see, of course, on top of the coffin with the Queen Mother's crown, the wreath of flowers from Her Majesty the Queen, which is signed in loving memory, Lilibet. Of course, that is the family name.
The Queen with Lady Sarah Chatto, who is the Queen's niece, granddaughter of the Queen Mother, on her way to
Eugenie, isn't it?
Westminster Hall. So this is the last group leaving Buckingham Palace toward Westminster, slow procession in the limousines. The royal standard evident there. Lots of windows for the crowd to see en route. Now, there aren't many people down at this side, as we note, because the full procession, of course, is not marching past the palace this morning. The Queen Mother was taken past the palace for the last time the other day toward St. James's Palace. Charles, the Duke, one other regular element of these kinds of wonderful processions in Britain, the horses of the Royal Mews, groomed to a fare thee well on a morning like this. The blacks, the grays, the bays, all under firm control of their handlers. And one of those handlers, by the way, is, for the first time, a woman. So precedent being broken here in a couple of ways in this procession. William just at the center of our frame there. Very tall. And there is a poignant moment that we can remember here. If you think back 5 years ago, William and Harry, Charles and Prince Philip the Duke walking behind a different carriage through the streets of London of Diana, Princess of Wales. Queen's limousine coming into Westminster. The Royal Standard at the Palace of Westminster, flying now because the Queen is on the property. No veils anymore to cover the emotions, we note. And as we hear those bands in the background, we're reminded of one particular group in the procession called the King's Regiment, which has on its battle honors Niagara from the War of 1812 in Canada. The front of the procession arrives at Parliament Square. Guard of honor drawn up from the Grenadier Guards with the band of the Grenadier Guards. Now all set in Parliament Square. Very different tone from this crowd than the one the Queen Mother normally sees when she drives through the streets of London, because she is so gregarious and open and warm. The crowd returned the favors every time when they waved to her and smiled at her. Today, they realize it is the last time they will be seeing her through these streets. And so through Horse Guards onto Whitehall, through that long tunnel, which we've noted in the past at other royal occasions, where you hear so clearly the elements of the procession, the horses' hooves, the shuffling feet. The Royal Navy so splendidly turned out this morning. And past the cenotaph. The Queen Mother lost a nephew, a brother, and a brother-in-law in war. And of course, she was allied to many different groups, including Colonel-in-Chief to the Toronto Scottish, the Black Watch, and the Royal Canadian Medical Corps, all of which here today. All served in Dieppe. All have been visited many times by the Queen Mother. In fact, the Toronto Scottish are now allowed the designation Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's own. They asked for that, and the Queen Mother accorded it to them. And there was to have been a presentation in the next year or so by the Queen Mother to the Toronto Scottish to honor that marker. And she said at the time, well, I'll have to stay around for another little while to make that happen, won't I? Well, of course, it didn't happen, but the Toronto Scottish are more than proud of being able to carry that designation. Members of the Queen Mother's household here, some of them with her for years and years. Sir Alistair Aird, the private secretary and controller to the Queen Mother for over 40 years. Let me call again upon Ingrid Seward and our other guest, Christopher Warwick, who's here beside me, if they wish to make a few comments on what we're seeing.
Well, I think that this really is a spectacle. It's a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle, really, for a lot of people. And although we can't see it on the screen at the moment, also, which is doesn't happen very often, behind us at the Palace of Westminster, we not only have the Royal Standard flying at full mast, as it always does, of course, but the Union flag flying at half-mast, not a sight that's often seen. Here on the screen now.
From the Queen.
In loving memory of the Queen. In loving memory, Lilibet.
Which is what her family all called her. You see Prince William this time has actually, last time we saw him in anything like this was when his mother died and his eyes were completely downcast. He's holding himself very straight and very solemn this time. He's almost a head above his cousins and brothers in that lineup. And next to his uncle David Linley, who's Princess Margaret's son.
Two, of course, the Princes of the Blood in their naval uniforms, all wearing the ribbon of the Garter, Britain's oldest order of chivalry, going back to the 14th century. course, is a very familiar route known by the Queen Mother and members of the royal family in innumerable processions through the years.
Down Whitehall toward Parliament Square. And this is where you really see the Majesty roll in the procession when it hits Whitehall, that wide avenue, down toward the home of the people's representative. She is coming to the people now, and they will have the opportunity over the next few days between now and Tuesday, beginning at noon British time today, to sign the Book of Condolences and file past the coffin. And we've already been told that people have been lining up there since 6:30 British time this morning. The drums echoing like a heartbeat through this picture. That wide perspective gives us the scene in Parliament Square, the familiar towers of Westminster. It's called overall the Palace of Westminster, the Houses of Parliament here, and of course Big Ben. Right on time, as Big Ben tells us, it is noon. We have just heard the 29th and last salvo of the minute guns echoing across the hush of this noon in Britain. The Queen waiting by the door at Westminster Hall for the other members of the family. The Duke of Edinburgh, the Princess Royal, the Prince of Wales, nephews, members of the Bowes-Lyon family from the procession, now formed up at the west door of Westminster Hall. So it will now be the responsibility of this bearer party, caps off, to take the coffin through the doors of Westminster Hall onto the catafalque. Once again, if you missed it before, the card there saying, in loving memory, Lilibet, the family name used so often for the Queen when speaking with her mother. Again, the crown. Princess Royal Anne saluting next to Edward. The Duke, Prince Charles. Gun carriage now bare of the coffin as the coffin begins its slow, measured move into the chapel. The Cross of Westminster leading along, which will be placed on the catafalque for the period of the lying in state here. Psalm 139 being sung by the choir from inside Westminster Hall. And this inside one of England's most ancient halls. The walls built in the 11th century by the son of William the Conqueror, William Rufus. Many public figures have lain in state here, including Winston Churchill in 1965 and King George VI in 1952, the Queen's husband, 50 years ago. Just had a glimpse there of the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who was present. The wooden frame of the catafalque, cloaked in purple velvet, as it sits on the red carpet, about 7 feet above the ancient flagstone floor. Vivid colors of the Queen Mother's personal standard. Catching glimpses of some familiar and famous faces you'll know. Margaret Thatcher, former Prime Minister, is here this morning. This This is the only part left from the original palaces of Westminster, the medieval chapel, Westminster Hall.
Let us pray. O Lord, our Heavenly Father, Almighty and everlasting God, we remember before Thee our sister, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. We give thanks for her example of faithful duty and unwearied service, and for the loyalty and love which she inspired. Hear, Lord, the prayers of Thy people, and grant that we who confess Thy name on earth with her may be made perfect in the kingdom of Thy Son, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Father of all mercies and giver of all comfort, deal graciously, we pray, with those who mourn, that casting all their care on Thee, they may know the consolation of Thy love. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
That was the Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey. The cross being carried into position for the period of mourning here at Westminster Hall. The Cross of Westminster. Now a final blessing from the Dean of Westminster.
Go in the peace of Christ. Amen.
These are the guards moving into position. The Life Guards, the Blues and Royals first, the Scots and Welsh Guards, the Grenadiers, and the Coldstream, by the Gentlemen at Arms and retired officers who form the Queen's Guard. They will rotate on duty here all of the time that the Queen Mother's coffin rests here at Westminster Hall. Taking up their positions for 6 hours at a turn. So there you have the movement into position of the guards, the lifeguards, the Blues and Royals, all the other members of the military who are there to guard the Queen Mother. We're back with our picture now, resting on their swords reversed, members of the guards. We're just having a little technical difficulty here with our picture, but we'll be trying to get it back to you. And I understand that, in fact, we do have the picture back where you are, so that's fine. Looking down at Westminster Hall, those old walls that have seen so much. The clergy will first bid farewell to the Queen and other members of the royal family, and then the Queen and the Duke will make their way back to Buckingham Palace. So the vigil begins. Not formally just yet, because we're 12:15 London time right now. It will be open to the public at 2, open from 2 until 6 today, and then 9 until 6. And this is the old timber put in place in this great old hall 1,000 years ago. Back outside as the clergy says goodbye to Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. And there with them the Lord Great Chamberlain, whose responsibility it is to look after the royal palaces. Well, it is the end of a moving and majestic ceremony, and one can only wonder what's going through the Queen's mind and the Duke's as they get back into the car and head back to Buckingham Palace. And that car passes Clarence House and St. James Palace, knowing that the Queen Mother is now taking a different route. She will be here with the vigil open to the people for 4 days, and then the service at Westminster Abbey on Tuesday. Now, the crowds are beginning to fill in from what we've been able to see here. Crowds leaning over Westminster Bridge. And to the left going in, to the right turning out, down Whitehall and back into Buckingham Palace. A round of applause for the Queen. Interesting when you think about this. Applause for the Queen, who is now, to some people, considered to be on her own. The mother gone, Margaret gone. She will be relying heavily, of course, on Prince Charles. And the monarchy moves into another era. Loud applause of support. A wave of applause now catching on with the crowd. Her Majesty and the Duke up Whitehall past the Cenotaph, back towards Buckingham Palace. You can hear the royal salute in the background for the Queen, turning into what was once the original entrance to Buckingham Palace. Well, the Queen has to be feeling gratified about that round of applause from that large crowd at Westminster Hall. Coming up on Tuesday morning. So there will be a very private time for the Queen and the Duke now, certainly for the rest of this day. And we have just seen a procession, the like of which many people will never see again, through the streets of London. Christopher Warwick and Ingrid Seward are here with me, and perhaps you'd like to comment on the kind of program we've seen this morning, because this was an eye-opener, especially the precision, the majesty, the color. It was done in a way that not only represented the feelings of the people and the dignitaries, but also touch people worldwide, I'm sure, looking in on these pictures.
British pageantry at its best, as only we can do it. Saying farewell to somebody who really held a very, very special place in the affections of the nation and abroad. And looking at these pictures, of course, here the Queen, having lost a sister, having lost a mother, but she has to go on being Queen. Very brave face here. Masking goodness only knows what kind of emotions.
I think it will have made her feel very warm and very happy, if happy is the right word, to feel the applause of the people, the respect of the people, the homage of the people.
With her.
They're kind of there with her. It's united everybody in a way that we haven't had for a long time, and it's rather what we needed. And now the royal family are all going back for lunch at Buckingham Palace with their various cousins and aunts and uncles, and then the Queen will drive back to Windsor to have a peaceful weekend before the rigours of next week set in.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's probably when she'll realise, as Lloyd's been saying, that she's the only one of that generation left, really.
That's right.
You know, two of the stars have gone, and she's now on her own, as you so rightly say, at the beginning of Golden Jubilee year, which would have been marvellous if she'd had the support of her sister and her mother, of course.
That's right, that's right.
You know.
This will be very difficult because it is the Golden Jubilee year, and the Queen now has to turn everything around and get into a very different mode for that kind of celebration. But the tone of that celebration will be very important. It'll be a statement to the British people about the state of the monarchy today, with the Queen leading it. Entirely on her own, supported by Prince Charles, of course, and the Duke, but she's up there in the centerpiece right now. We have Lisa LaFlamme standing by at Westminster Hall, where she has a special guest to talk to. Lisa?
Thank you, Lloyd. Yes, so often over the past 10 days, we've talked about the fact that there's a lot of generational mourning going on in the City of London, and that the Queen Mother had such a significant role during World War II, and for those people who lived in London during that time. And I'm joined by Barry Turner, who is one of those people and also a member of the RAF. And Mr. Turner, give me your thoughts as you watched the Queen Mother move into...
I was very moved, because in the wartime, the Queen and King stayed in London, and I went to Canada probably at the worst time of the blitz when the V bombs were dropping.
You trained in Canada for aviator.
At Rivers, #1 CNS, Rivers.
And for the Queen Mother to have stayed here during the most dangerous time, tell me what it was like at that time.
Oh, the fact that she was prepared to walk around London and risking her own life and staying in Buckingham Palace shows what a brave person she was.
And over the years, how do you feel she has sort of maintained that respect that a lot of people say started during that?
Yes, she stands for a whole lot of values that are really gone now. And the world is very different. We spoke about the empire in those days. We were told not to refer to the dominions. That's a word we mustn't use when we were in Canada. And so there was still a feeling of unity amongst the English-speaking people.
And what do you think then the significance of her passing? So many say this is the end of the era, but what is it for you?
No, it isn't. No, the example of her life is terrific, and there's always going to be an inspiration for everybody in the country. I think even younger people are reacting favourably to it too.
Well, I want to thank you, Barry Turner, so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Very nice, thank you.
And as Mr. Turner said, there is a lot of young people, Lloyd, also. In fact, so many of the people we've seen line the gates to get a glimpse of the procession today were indeed young families. So perhaps they are all here just to witness this moment in history. Lloyd?
Yes, what we're going to be seeing over the next few days, Lisa, is just how many young people show up to sign the Book of Condolence and file slowly past the coffin. That will be fascinating to watch. Now, we understand that several hundred people have been standing there at Westminster Hall outside since about 6:30 London time this morning, just to be first in line to get a look at the coffin and all the Queen Mother's personal standard on top of it. You were talking there to that gentleman about the Queen Mother and her way of greeting people and saying things to people. I can recall from covering her on royal tours in Canada, the big hats, the gregariousness, that warm, warm smile, and those eyes. When she looked at you, she was only looking at you and she was talking directly to you. And Christopher and I were speaking earlier this morning about when she passes by a crowd in the car, it looks as though she's looking actually at everybody. At the one person, when you're standing there, she's looking directly at you so far as you're concerned. Well, we are going to be continuing on with our coverage through Canada AM. There'll be more pictures, and we'd like to remind you now that we will also be on the air with live coverage of the Queen Mother's funeral at 5 a.m., beginning 5 a.m. on Tuesday morning. That's next Tuesday morning, live coverage of the Queen Mother's funeral from London. And so we have come to the end of a day of great pageantry. There, by the way, just to refer again to 2 a.m. Pacific time, because some of you are going to be getting up very early or staying up very late to watch the funeral next Tuesday. We've come to the end of a wonderful day here. Wonderful in the sense that we have seen great pageantry in honor of a great lady. We're going to say goodbye for a few moments as we look at this vignette.
considering a more general traffic fine. Sports enthusiasts who obstruct the free flow of traffic would first be warned, then moved by police. And that is your newscast. Now here's Sharon Caddy with a look at the weather.
Thank you, Marcy. We have shower activity moving into British Columbia, but also milder temperatures. Taking a look in Victoria today, 13 degrees for the high with some showers, 10 through Kelowna. A few flurries into the interior. In Edmonton, clear and 0 today. In Saskatchewan, temperatures are just above a freezing mark with a mix of sun and cloud through Regina and Saskatoon. In Winnipeg, cloud will be exiting later in the day. Some shower activity and a high of 5. In Ontario, clearing in the northwest. We have showers, though, extending from northeastern Ontario all the way in through Ottawa, with a high of 14. 17 degrees the expected high today in Toronto. Montreal and Quebec City in the middle of this low pressure system, so we're seeing cloud and rain through the day. Fairly mild, though, 12 today in Montreal. As we take a look to St. John, 9 degrees, some shower activity. In Halifax, 8 degrees and rain. Mainly cloudy today in Sydney. In Newfoundland and Labrador, Corner Brook, mixed precipitation, wet, snow and rain, and 4 degrees. In Labrador City, 1 degree. And as we take a look to the north, clear in Yellowknife and clear in Iqaluit and -10. Now a look at your local weather. We have learned so much about the Queen Mother in the last week, and the family she grew up in of 10 children, mostly in Scotland, but she also spent a great deal of her youth in a beautiful rural manor about an hour from London. We had an opportunity to go there. Her nephew is now the lord of that manor in St. Paul's, Waldenbury, where right up until last summer she had an annual visit. Here's a look at that interview.
She usually comes in July for a weekend, and on that occasion we showed her all that she wanted to see around the garden, which meant in that day going round in a little golf buggy. And so we went all over this garden and a bit beyond, which means going into really quite rough sort of places, jungly places.
This obviously had a very special place in her heart.
She knew this place better than anybody else in the early decades of the century, and I think that it does have a very, or did have a very important part in her memories. And
is it hard for you to speak of her in the past tense?
Yes, I suppose it is. I suppose it is. But she was such a vivid, alive person that it seems as if, you know, she's still with us, doesn't it?
It's been reported that this is where the king proposed to her.
I suspect there was many conversations and probably many places where he might have broached the subject. But there is not a specific place that she ever mentioned as being the place where he proposed. And I suspect if there was, she would probably, that would have been her own private sort of memory.
What's one of your favorite memories of, I mean, I call her your aunt because indeed she is, but in fact she's, you know, the Queen Mother.
She made it such fun for everybody around. If you had a room full of people, where she was where the party was. So, and that is an abiding memory. It was this wonderful gift of putting some energy and vitality into a group of people.
You know, you talk about special visits, and one of the special visits for Canadians was the very first time she came to Canada.
The whole trip went extremely well, and I think that this is something that she just never forgot.
Did she often talk about it, or?
She certainly mentioned it, and I think that Canada had a very special place for her in her heart that nowhere else had, and it's because of that first important voyage that she made, and which went so well, and amid all the uncertainty that was existing at that time.
Because certainly the abdication was very fresh at that moment.
Abdication was fresh, the war was looming, there was all sorts of difficult features about that time.
Was she very open within the family about her feelings concerning the abdication?
I think that there's no doubt that it was a big shock. The shock was getting off a train and seeing a poster of some newspaper mentioning the abdication, because prior to that, I'm sure they deliberately kept out of the whole discussion and question of abdication.
What will you personally miss most about her?
Her coming here has been a part of the life of the place, and that'll certainly be my biggest miss.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today on your very significant aunt and the Queen Mother's life. Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted Canada was so fond of her.
Need an extra outlet? Only new Glade plug-in scented oil has an extra outlet built right in, so it won't block yours. Wizard doesn't have it.
Plug it in, plug it in.
New Pledge with orange oil. It really does clean.
Orange oil revitalizes.
It's like a vitamin.
Pledge orange oil.
It brought this wood back to life, bringing out the natural shine.
New Pledge with orange oil. The power of orange oil to clean and revitalize.
Arby's introduces Market Fresh sandwiches, real deli-style sandwiches from a fast food restaurant. They're made with thick sliced honey wheat bread, very soft, tender meats like slow-roasted turkey, sliced just so. Big Eye Swiss, leaf lettuce, and red onion, each made fresh for you. Authentic deli from a fast food restaurant. Now that's something you don't see every day, unless you go to Arby's every day. Arby's new Market Fresh sandwiches. Satisfy your grown-up tastes.
What is a red tag day, you say? It's a day you say goodbye old car and hello brand new Toyota. You've been waiting long enough. Roll film. Oh, look, there's your dream machine. Technology, style, and power. You know you love them. Right there's a 2003 model. Let's get you to Access Toyota Red Tag Days right now, and you can get a brand new Toyota. And I'll take care of the old car for you. Don't worry, I'm a very safe driver now.
Did you know that a contact lens in the hands of an eye care professional can take your vision to another level? This is AccuView 2, and 7 out of 10 who wear it see better than 20/20. And you thought 20/20 was as good as it gets? Ask your eye care professional about the #1 doctor-prescribed lens, AccuView 2. AccuView, advancing the science of sight.
Well, imagine the experience of cooking for the royal family. Well, Chef John Higgins did just that. For 2 years, he was the a cook at Buckingham Palace and on the Royal Yacht Britannia. He is now the exclusive consultant chef at the Royal Meridian King Edward in Toronto and also working at George Brown College, the famous cooking school. Joins us now to tell us a little bit of royal stories of the Queen Mum, who essentially was a scone lover. But first of all, you're 20 years old. You walk into Buckingham Palace to work there as a cook. What's that like?
A lot of fun. A little bit nerve-wracking, you know, it's a different kind of lifestyle.
How'd you get that job?
I just kept on writing and bugging people. You know, like I believe if you don't ask, you don't get. You don't play the 649, you're never going to win, so no point in saying you're never going to get it.
So you just kept going and going. And on the Royal Yacht Britannia as well?
We got to travel, especially all over the UK, and done a couple of international trips.
Now, you cook for the Queen Mum these scones. Now, these are her favorites, is that right?
Exactly.
Did she have a special way she liked them made?
No, just very, very simple. I mean, most of the rolls are very simple eaters, just good quality product.
Good quality.
You know, good butter, good flour, etc.
And so what does she, now, does she have raisins in her scones?
Yeah, we used to put raisins, and sometimes actually for royal tea, we'd actually put them with raisins or without raisins, so you get a
little bit of a variety there. Okay, so today we're going to make the scones that you made for the Queen Mum.
Exactly.
Same way. So what do we need here?
In here we have our butter, flour, a little bit of baking powder.
So you kind of just pre-mix the butter, flour a little bit together. A little salt, yep.
And in here. And the good thing with this machine actually is just stir. And we're going to just actually start to do a little bit of crumb. I'm just going to put some yogurt in here now.
Oh, so is that just plain yogurt?
That's plain yogurt.
Plain yogurt.
You can actually, if you didn't have yogurt, you could actually use buttermilk.
Buttermilk. What would the Queen Mum prefer, yogurt or buttermilk? What was it?
6.5 dozen.
Oh, you never told her?
Oh, no.
Oh,
secret cooking.
Sometimes you made them with buttermilk, sometimes you made them with yogurt.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Whatever's around.
Yeah, all right. That's a chef's secret,
so
right there.
we get the flour, the eggs, the yogurt, etc. And we can put some raisins in here.
It doesn't take long for that to
very, very
give you a pretty good dough, does it?
And a good thing about this machine is pretty powerful, which makes a big, big difference. So let's say you take it to this stage, like almost a soft stage. And so we don't have to play with it too much.
Right, because you
take
got one here. Okay.
The thing is you can either make these at home.
Let me just ask you one quick question, too. This is the finished product of that, but how long would that have taken to get to that stage?
That would have taken another 20 seconds.
20 seconds.
20 seconds.
Yeah.
Take it out, roll it. Just so you pat it together, you actually start to knead it so slightly. And the good thing about this is you can either, like I say, you can either make them at home, or you could possibly get into the King Edward Hotel and have afternoon
tea. You could have them there, sure, if you're,
They're doing not a bad job down there.
No.
Not bad.
Now.
And then all you have to do really now is just to cut them.
And you're cutting them with
just a small cutter.
Okay.
Some people use a glass, etc.
Is thickness important here?
Yeah.
How thick do you want them to be?
I would say about half an inch.
About a half an inch thick.
Just want to come up that thing when you're just coloring them. Just take them, cut them round, and always put them in the flour.
Just makes it easier to cut them, right? Yeah.
So it's one of those things. We're always at the hotel. We're always busy with afternoon tea. Actually, this week they're doing the afternoon tea. They're doing a book also of condolences for the Queen Mother, which is in the lobby.
So you go down and sign, is it?
So you can sign that thing. I believe it's there until Thursday evening, so it's pretty good.
Now, earlier today, I know that you sent some down, and I had a scone earlier this morning. And now I had it with
scones earlier this morning.
Okay, Rod, I stand corrected. I had 4 or 5 scones earlier this morning, but I've been here for a while. I understand. And they were delicious. Now, I had them with butter and jam.
Yeah,
is that the preferred way to have them?
Actually, Devon cream.
Devon cream.
Devon cream, all the way from Devon in England. Nice.
Oh, didn't have any of that.
I brought some actually this afternoon. And the Devon cream's got 52% butter fat, so it's very, very rich.
Very rich.
You don't need too much if now you have to go jogging in the afternoon.
So what do you do with these now?
Take these basically, put them in a tray.
Yep.
Put them in the oven, 375 degrees.
375, and there they are.
15 minutes later, that's what happens.
And that's now you're suggesting eating those with the Devon cream.
Devon cream and some fresh jam.
And some fresh jam.
If you make jam, it's great.
They're delicious. And now I do want to point. I want to get your attention to this picture here because when the Queen Mother was in Toronto in 1989,
correct,
she stayed at the house of Galen Weston, and that is you. Now, is this the kitchen staff there?
Yeah, that was some of the staff actually from the King Edward Hotel, and two of the staff from Galen Weston's.
And tell me the story about that, because she insisted on having her picture taken with you.
We weren't actually supposed to get a picture taken, but the footman, I knew the footman from the palace, and then the housekeeper, Isabel, we got organised that we were the first people to get a picture taken. So needless to say, she broke protocol once again.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, and I don't want to do a surprise here, but I'm holding these up, and I guess I'll just hold them right there. Tell me about these cufflinks.
And after as a thank you for looking after the Queen Mother for the 5 days we looked after her, she gave me a beautiful set of silver cufflinks with the yarn engraved on them.
Have you ever worn these?
No, scared to wear them just in case.
Have they ever been? And I should say, because on here too, it says this is great by appointment to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, Goldsmiths and Silversmiths, Hancocks and Company in London. So that's how you tell. Beautiful, boy, that's great. Which is the Devon cream here?
Devon cream is the one at the front now.
Is that this here?
All low calorie.
Yeah, very low calorie.
Low calorie. Just have to walk.
These are pretty low calorie, right? Yeah. This is low cal?
This is real low cal.
How low? Okay, I get it. John Higgins, thank you very much. Nice to see you. All right, hey, coming up, John McDermott pays another tribute to the Queen Mother in song. Stay with us.
A touch of heaven.
When your skin is perfectly soft and perfectly fresh, it's perfectly comfortable. New Lever 2000 Moisture Response with Vitamin E. Its moisturizer goes where you need extra attention so you can get the perfect clean for all your 2,000 parts.
Janie, time to eat. Janie, dinner.
Okay, Mom. Just one more page?
Okay.
This moment brought to you by Sylvan Learning Center.
I didn't like reading. Then they showed me it was fun.
We call our approach the Sylvan Advantage. It's individual attention from highly trained and certified teachers, plus progress reports for you.
In Saskatoon, call Sylvan Learning Center at 978-7323.
Arby's introduces Market Fresh sandwiches, real deli-style sandwiches from a fast food restaurant. They're made with thick sliced honey wheat bread, very soft. Tender meats like slow-roasted ham, sliced just so. Big Eye Swiss, leaf lettuce, and red onion, each made fresh for you. Authentic deli from a fast food restaurant. Now that's something you don't see every day, unless you go to Arby's every day. Arby's new Market Fresh sandwiches. Satisfy your grown-up tastes.
Some people have argued that the groundhog foretells the coming of spring. We've got our own opinion. It's Mazda's Spring Breakthrough event. Now you can get incredibly low purchase financing from 1.9%. Great cash prices and lease offers on all your favorite Mazdas. Hurry into Mazda's Spring Breakthrough event today. This year's forecast calls for fun.
Triple platinum recording artist John McDermott joins us now with a special musical tribute to the Queen Mother. Welcome.
Hey.
I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through. In that small cafe, the park across the way, the children's carousel, the chestnut tree, the wishing well. I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you. Seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be but I'll be seeing you.
Good to see you. It's been a day, a week of remembrance for the Queen Mum, but do you get a sense of that celebration, the sense of nostalgia? We had a lot of veterans in the studio today, and I know you like to sing about
We've just
veterans.
started our Ontario tour, and we've actually, the couple of shows that we've done, it was really evident that when we talked about it, that you know, people were touched by this great lady who has left a huge mark, a huge mark, and so you can only when you think of these pieces, of course, she's gone through a number of periods of change in the world of music that came from that era, that material. So over 2-3 wars and times of a change. So yeah.
Someone close to your heart too. I don't know if you ever met her, but someone with Scottish roots.
No, but I've met the fella that cooked for her. So
That's
that's
very important.
I feel as though I'm going to have some of her scone. So
I know you're a huge sports fan, and I know it may seem a little out of touch, but when Rocket Richard died in Quebec, a lot of young kids were around, and they never saw the Rocket. You see a lot of young kids watching in the parade, watching the Queen Mother.
Yeah, same thing. It crosses generations, and that's because, much like the music of these eras, it's passed on from the parents and the grandparents to the parents to the children. So the same message about how special this woman was has been passed on.
And we'll be right back. Thank you.
Weekdays on CTV.
Oh, we're just yapping away.
Upfront and personal.
Seriously, I wear a 38 long. I'm proud of it.
Right to the point.
Well, somebody talk, for heaven's sake. I'm busy.
Vicky Gabbro's distinctive style brings you the biggest stars.
I just want to check your roots. They're better than mine, honey.
Expect the unexpected.
Now laugh. See? Actors, you gotta love them.
Vicky Gabbro, weekday mornings at 10 on CTV.
Good morning, Canada. It's your wake-up call to catch up on the week's most important events. Take a uniquely Canadian perspective of the stories that shape our country. From the front page to the offbeat.
That dog can handle the puck better than Gretzky.
Kick off your day with news headlines, celebrity interviews, consumer tips, health reports, and musical guests that are worth waking up for. Good morning, Canada. Weekend mornings at 7 on CTV.
CTV believes in being accountable to you, the viewer, in our drama, information, and entertainment programming. We're a member of the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council, and as such, are committed to the highest standards of broadcasting. If you have a comment to make about our programming, contact us. We'll respond to you and send you information on the Council and our codes. This message is brought to you by the Canadian Association of Broadcasters and this CTV station. Up-to-date and current weather conditions. The source of all Environment Canada weather information is yours at www.weatheroffice.com. You can access forecast and current conditions, as well as weather warnings for the entire country. Check the wind chill, humidex, and other topical data. Then for additional products and services, check out the Weather Store. Environment Canada's hot button weather store is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for all Canadians. Visit www.weatheroffice.com, Canada's premier weather site on the web.
CTV, Canadian television.